Chapter 1154. Yi Xian and Old Gu were flying through the starry sky on their swords. They were heading towards the sword region. Old Gu spoke abruptly, "Young sect master, are you able to contact the sect master? The green-clothed man?" Yi Xian shook his head, "I can't." Old Gu fell silent. Yi Xian gazed at him, "What's wrong?" Old Gu spoke softly, "I'm afraid it's not that simple this time." Yi Xian was about to speak when he suddenly lowered his head. A moment later, he and Old Gu had vanished amidst the starry sky. It didn't take long for Yi Xian and Old Gu to appear before an ancient city. At this moment, shrill cries resounded incessantly from within the ancient city while countless strands of black energy floated through the sky. Old Gu spoke in a low voice, "Yin spirit." As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward, and a sword suddenly flew out from behind him. Hiss! A ray of sword light tore through the sky and slashed into the ancient city. Bang! Suddenly, a powerful force shot into the sky from within the ancient city, and the ray of sword light was instantly shattered. After that, a figure suddenly appeared before Yi Xian and Old Gu. Yi Xian frowned. The Yin spirit looked exactly like a human, but it emanated dense Yin energy and death energy. That was the only thing that was different from humans. As if he knew the question in Yi Xian's heart, Old Gu spoke abruptly, "They can take the appearance of anyone they devour." Suddenly, the Yin spirit took a deep glance at Yi Xian, and then he turned around and fled. Obviously, he'd sensed danger. At the instant the Yin spirit fled, Old Gu was about to attack. However, a ray of white light suddenly flashed, and then the Yin spirit was blasted into pieces. Yi Xian and Old Gu turned around and saw a woman walking over slowly from afar. She wore a white embroidered robe, had shoulder-length hair, and a red mole between her brows. She seemed proud like a plum blossom in the snow. Her eyes were clear like water, and it seemed like she could see through everything. She walked over slowly to Old Gu and Yi Xian, and then she grinned, "Are both of you from the sword sect?" Yi Xian nodded, "And you are?" The woman laughed and said, "By Yin." Yi Xian nodded slightly. "Lady Han is quite strong." The woman looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Young master, ye must be joking." Yi Xian looked at Wu Yin. "You know me?" Gue laughed sinisterly. In the five-dimensional universe, who doesn't know about young Master Yi? Yi Xian was just about to speak when the gate to the ancient city in the distance suddenly cracked open, and then countless people charged out. When he saw these people, Yi Xian's face immediately darkened. These people in front of him were no longer human. These people's entire bodies were pitch black, and they had hideous expressions. Their entire bodies emitted a dense aura of death and Yin Qi. Obviously, they had become members of the spirit of Yin. Yi Xian and Old Man Gu's faces darkened when they saw that. The dark spirits were too terrifying. Because once they came into contact with them, there was a possibility that they would become one of them. This kind of ability was too overpowered. In the city, countless people charged out, densely packed together. At this moment, Gue Yin suddenly said, "If we let them go to other places, the people there will become dark spirits." As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian and Old Man Gu. Old Man Gu looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at those people. "Can they be saved?" Old Man Gu shook his head. Yi Xian nodded. "Kill." Old Man Gu turned into a sword ray and charged out. Looking at the densely packed crowd of dark spirits in the distance, Yi Xian was silent. At this moment, he finally felt how terrifying the dark spirits were. At this moment, Gue Yin suddenly said, "Young Master Yi, do you know much about the dark spirits?" Yi Xian shook his head. "Not much." Gue Yin was silent. Yi Xian asked, "Why? Do you know much about them?" Gue Yin gently combed her hair that was messed up by the wind and said softly, I killed a dark spirit before. They have a special characteristic, which is that they can devour. They can also assimilate. If they choose to devour, they will become stronger. If they choose to assimilate, whoever they attack, be it human or spirit, will become one of them. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. They will devour the powerful and assimilate the weaker ones. Yi Xian suddenly said, Miss Guiyin, it's not a coincidence that we met, right? Guiyin smiled. Young Master Yi is very cautious. Yi Xian smiled. I'm just asking. Guiyin looked at Yi Xian and smiled. It's a coincidence. Yi Xian nodded. At this moment, Old Man Gu appeared beside Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, let's go. Old Man Gu nodded. He glanced at Guiyin and was about to leave with Yi Xian. At this moment, dozens of powerful auras suddenly appeared in the distant sky. Old Man Gu's expression changed drastically. They're Yin spirits, and they're powerful Yin spirits. Why are there so many powerful Yin spirits here? Yi Xian said softly, are they coming for us? Meanwhile, Guiyin spoke abruptly, I don't think so. It's probably because I killed that dark spirit earlier. As soon as she finished speaking, over 10 powerful Yin spirits had appeared in front of them. The Yin spirit in the lead stared fixedly at Guiyin, you killed him? Guiyin laughed. Yes. The Yin spirit's expression instantly became ferocious. How dare you? As soon as he finished speaking, he charged towards Guiyin. Guiyin's expression was calm. She waved her hand lightly, and a ray of white light surged out. Right at this moment, a terrifying ray of black light surged out from the Yin spirit, and the ray of white light was instantly devoured by the black light. Guiyin's expression changed, and she retreated. Suddenly, a ray of light slashed against the black light. Bang! The black light vanished in an instant. Meanwhile, the group of Yin spirits gazed at Yi Xian and Old Man Gu. The Yin spirit in the lead stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Swordsman. Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The Yin spirit suddenly roared furiously. In the next moment, he and the other Yin spirits by his side charged directly at Yi Xian. Yi Xian opened his palm, and then the executing heaven sword slashed out. Hiss! The Yin spirit in the lead didn't even have the chance to react before he was slashed into pieces by the executing heaven sword. The other Yin spirits were stunned for a moment when they witnessed this scene, and then they turned around and fled. Old Man Gu was just about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly said, something's off. Old Man Gu gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, what's wrong? As he spoke, he looked directly at Guiyin, and Guiyin laughed, what? Yi Xian didn't waste his breath at all, and he just drew his sword and slashed. He didn't hold back at all with this slash. Old Man Gu was stunned when he saw Yi Xian suddenly attack. What's going on? Hiss! The sound of space being torn apart resounded. Yi Xian's attack missed. At this moment, Guiyin was over 100 m away. She still had a faint smile on her face, and she seemed very composed. Yi Xian gazed at Guiyin, let me guess. You're from the spirit clan of Yin. Guiyin laughed, young Master Yi is smart as expected. That's right, I'm from the spirit clan of Yin. Yi Xian smiled, you've come to kill me? Guiyin gazed at Yi Xian, no, I just want to see you. Yi Xian frowned slightly, see me? Guiyin nodded, yes. Of course, there's one more thing. I want to confirm something. Yi Xian smiled, what is it? Guiyin gazed at Yi Xian, I want to confirm your bloodline. Yi Xian stared at Guiyin, my bloodline has something to do with you? Guiyin smiled, of course it has something to do with you. You have to repay some people's debts. Yi Xian walked towards Gue Yin with his sword in hand. Can you explain it more clearly? Gue Yin looked at Yi Xian. The blood feud of my spirit clan's tens of millions of ancestors, you have to repay it with your blood. Yi Xian stopped and frowned. Did you find the wrong person? Gue Yin didn't speak again. She and the Yin spirits around her gradually became illusory. Yi Xian slashed out with his sword. Hiss! A ray of sword light pierced through the air, but this sword slashed empty air. Gue Yin and the other Yin spirits had already disappeared. Yi Xian was silent. Blood feud? He had a blood feud with the spirit clan of Yin? No. Gue Yin said that he, Yi Xian, had to repay some people's debts. What's that? Yi Xian was bewildered. Who had to repay a blood debt? Meanwhile, Old Gu suddenly said, I know what she means. Yi Xian gazed at Old Gu, and Old Gu said softly, I almost forgot about this. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. Old Gu, please enlighten me. Old Gu looked at Yi Xian. The blood feud of the tens of millions of spirit clans' ancestors she spoke of refers to what the sect master did all those years ago. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he said, then she should look for the sect master of the sword sect. Old Gu shook his head. The sect master isn't in this world. Yi Xian was still puzzled. Then she should look for me? That doesn't make sense. Old Gu hesitated for a moment, and then he said, don't you have the sect master's inheritance? That should be the reason. Yi Xian was speechless. Old Gu spoke in a low voice, no matter what, you must be careful, young sect master. Since the sect master isn't in this world, they'll definitely take revenge on you. As he spoke, he gazed at Yi Xian. You might not know this, but the ancestors of the spirit clan swore a blood oath that they would never enter the cycle of reincarnation if their descendants don't avenge them. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. They're that ruthless? Old Gu nodded. The sect master stopped them all those years ago and killed too many of them. If the sect master hadn't been busy with something during that battle, he would probably have been able to annihilate all the spirit clan members. Now that he isn't here, the spirit clan will definitely come looking for you if they want to take revenge. You have to return to the sword sect with me. Only there will you be safe. Yi Xian's face darkened. I seem to be quite unlucky. I have to take the blame for what the sect master of the sword sect did? Isn't this a trap? Old Gu suddenly said, young sect master, let's go. Yi Xian nodded. Soon, the two of them turned into two sword lights and soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the horizon. Boundless underground city. Tendo pawn shop. On this day, a person suddenly walked into the pawn shop. Xiao Dao, who was sitting behind the counter, suddenly raised her head. She opened her palms and two blood-red sickles appeared in her hands. Right at this moment, that person smiled. Young miss of the Diabolism clan that dominates the 3,000 great worlds, how are you? Xiao Dao stared at that person. You guys are very capable. You even managed to investigate my background. That person sat in front of Xiao Dao and smiled sweetly. Young miss, if you were at your peak, would be wary of you. But now, if you don't want to die, it's best that you don't make a move. Xiao Dao's eyes gradually turned cold. Are you threatening me? That person looked at Xiao Dao and smiled. You can think of it that way. Also, I hope you understand that not killing you is giving the Diabolism clan face, not giving you face. You haven't recovered yet, so you don't have the qualifications for me to give you face. Xiao Dao was silent. That person said again, from now on, I don't want to see you leave this room. I also don't want to see you contact Yi Xian. Otherwise, young Miss Xiao Dao, you will definitely die. You should understand your current situation. The current you is not my opponent. Xiao Dao looked at that person. Your target is him. That person nodded and smiled. Of course it's him. The son will pay his father's debt. Xiao Dao smiled. If you go find him now, he will definitely not be your opponent. That person smiled and said nothing. Xiao Dao's smile suddenly disappeared. You wait. That person smiled and said softly, that woman is about to leave the sixth dimension. After saying that, she stood up and left. Chapter 1155. In the pawn shop, Xiao Dao was silent. That woman was about to leave. That woman was naturally the plain-dressed woman. She was waiting for the plain-dressed woman to leave. Xiao Dao raised her head and frowned deeply. She suddenly realized that she had greatly underestimated the spirits of Dark Ones. Without the leader of the Sword Sect, could the Sword Sect stop the spirits of Dark Ones? Could they? Originally, she believed in the Sword Sect. Because that group of swordsmen was too terrifying. Not to mention in the fifth dimension, even in the place where she came from, they were a top force. However, after seeing that woman, she was a little shaken. Originally, she thought that Arrow was the most monstrous person in this era. But now, it seemed like that was not the case. At the same time, she also realized that her innate talent was not much. Xiao Dao smiled bitterly. As the old saying goes, there is always someone better than you. You think that you are monstrous, but you don't know that there is someone even more monstrous than you. At this moment, there was still a trace of sorrow in her heart. Because she knew that the reason she was still alive was not because of her family, but because of that plain-dressed woman. If it were not for that woman, she would have been dead. Wasteland Country. On this day, Arrow, who was sitting cross-legged in her room, suddenly opened her eyes. The next moment, she turned into a sword light and soared into the sky. Soon, she arrived in the sky above the Wasteland Country. Opposite her stood a woman. The woman looked like she was in her 20s. She wore a simple hemp gown with a ribbon tied around her waist. This made her slender figure look even more graceful. Her beautiful hair was tied up with a ribbon. She looked very neat and tidy. From her appearance, she was very, very ordinary. When he saw this woman, Ah Luo's brows instantly furrowed. The woman looked at Arrow and smiled, Your Excellency Arrow, you will definitely not agree to what I want to say. So, you can use your sword now. I will only give you one chance. Without any hesitation, the sword in Arrow's right hand suddenly flew up. In the sky, a sword light like a meteor slashed towards the woman. Wherever the sword passed, space exploded inch by inch and was directly annihilated. And when the sword fell, Aluo's pupils suddenly shrank. The eternal sword was caught between two fingers. The woman's two fingers caught Arrow's sword. Two of the woman's fingers suddenly loosened, and the eternal sword flew back to Arrow. The woman looked at Arrow, smiled and said, This is not your strongest sword. Because you're someone I admire, I'll give you another chance. Arrow grabbed the immortal sword and slashed it across his throat. Chi! In the blink of an eye, Arrow's body became illusory. No, his body almost collapsed. Obviously, she wanted to kill the woman in front of her with a single strike. On the other side, the woman suddenly closed her eyes slowly. At the same time, the space around her suddenly trembled, as if some sort of power was approaching. Right at this moment, the woman's thumb and index finger gently clamped together, and a wisp of sword light suddenly appeared on the tip of her finger. In the distance, Arrow suddenly roared, Slash! The wisp of sword light suddenly trembled and was about to break free from the woman's hand, but the woman's two fingers suddenly twisted. Boom! The sword light instantly collapsed, and Arrow retreated thousands of feet. At the same time, her body directly became transparent. In the distance, the woman looked at Arrow, smiled and said, From now on, Miss Arrow cannot leave this city. Otherwise, there will be no more Arrow in this world, no more great wilderness country. With that, she turned and left. In the sky, Arrow suddenly turned her head, and at this moment, her eyes were filled with worry. The woman who just left had reached the realm of Returning Origin Realm Breaker. Returning Origin Realm Breaker before the age of 20. What kind of demonic deity was this? After the linen robe woman left the great wilderness country, she arrived in the sky. At this time, a woman came to her side. This person was the one who came into contact with Yi Xian, Bai Yin. Bai Yin slightly bowed to the woman. It's confirmed. His bloodline is exactly the same as that swordsman's. The linen robe woman smiled. How is he? Bai Yin spoke in a low voice. He isn't simple. The linen robe woman spoke softly. Of course he isn't simple. Bai Yin hesitated for a moment and said, if young miss were to make a move, then killing him would probably be as easy as flipping your hand. The linen robe woman glanced at Bai Yin. Do you know why my spirit race lost so miserably all those years ago? Bai Yin lowered his head slightly and remained silent. The linen robe woman spoke softly. Our seniors lost miserably all those years ago because they became arrogant. Since they left their homeland and arrived in this universe, they've been successful in every endeavor, and their strength has grown stronger and stronger. That's exactly why they've become arrogant. If they'd investigated that green-clothed man carefully all those years ago, then my spirit race wouldn't have lost so miserably. When she spoke up to hear, she gazed at Bai Yin. We must take all our opponents seriously. Underestimating our opponents will cause us to be doomed eternally. Bai Yin hesitated for a moment and said, our seniors never imagined that the green-clothed swordsman would be so formidable. The linen robe woman smiled. So, we can't act rashly before that woman in a plain dress leaves. We can't afford to make the same mistake again. Bai Yin spoke in a low voice. Young miss, is that woman really that strong? The linen robe woman closed her eyes slowly. If she doesn't leave, then my spirit race won't be able to leave the Yin spirit dimension for eternity. Bai Yin was astounded when he heard this. After a short while, the linen robe woman spoke softly. Send my orders. No one is allowed to leave the Yin spirit dimension without my orders, and no one is allowed to act against Yi Xian. I'll definitely kill anyone who dares to look for trouble with him before that woman leaves the 6th dimension. Bai Yin bowed slightly and left silently. The linen robe woman raised her head and looked towards the depths of the starry sky. With her vision, she was still able to see that plain dress. A long time passed before she suddenly asked, You should have killed me. Otherwise, would have killed you if I had some time. Somewhere in the depths of the starry sky, the woman in a plain dress suddenly stopped moving. She glanced down while her eyes were filled with disdain. I'll give you 100,000 years. As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished into the depths of the starry sky. Yi Xian and Gu Qing were flying swiftly through the starry sky. All along the way, Yi Xian had a solemn expression on his face. Because he kept having the feeling that the matter wasn't so simple. Around 2 hours later, Yi Xian suddenly sensed formidable sword insight. He raised his head and looked over. There was a mountain standing towering not too far away, and flying swords frequently flew up from the mountain and shot into the depths of the starry sky. Yi Xian gazed at Gu Qing, and the latter spoke softly, This is the sword dimension. The sword dimension. As they spoke, Yi Xian and Gu Qing arrived at the peak of the mountain, and then they appeared before a hall. Before the hall, Yi Xian saw the green-clothed man's statue once more. Meanwhile, Xiaoling appeared by Yi Xian's side, and she gazed at the white little fellow on the green-clothed man's shoulder. Gu Qing looked at Yi Xian. Let's go in. Yi Xian nodded, and the two of them were about to enter. At this moment, Xiaoling suddenly ran to the green-clothed man's statue, and with a gentle stomp of her foot, the limestone floor cracked. Then, she pushed away the gravel and took out a small white box. Yi Xian and Gu Qing were stunned. Xiaoling walked to Yi Xian with the box in her arms, and said with a grin, Brother, look, it's a box. Yi Xian looked at Gu Qing, and Gu Qing replied in a deep voice, I don't know. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Ling. How did you know that there's a box below? Xiao Ling pointed at the white little fellow in the distance. She told me secretly in the past. Yi Xian was speechless. Gu Qing smiled bitterly. So it's her. Yi Xian looked at Gu Qing, and Gu Qing chuckled. That little fellow likes to play with these things. In any case, she's very mischievous. Fortunately, Sect Master and Madam Sect Master are here, otherwise, that little fellow will destroy the entire sword sect. She's really too mischievous. Yi Xian smiled. Mischievous? Gu Qing nodded. She likes to exchange candied haws with others. Sigh. Let's not talk about her. Talking about her gives me a headache. Yi Xian was speechless. A moment later, Gu Qing led Yi Xian towards the hall. Xiao Ling happily carried the box back into the prison pagoda. Box. Xiao Ling hugged the box and started mumbling. Yi Xian followed Gu Qing into the hall, and the hall was empty. Not only in the hall, but the entire sword sect was empty. Gu Qing said solemnly, they should be at the entrance of the Yin spirit world. Young sect master, please wait here for a moment. I'll be back soon. After saying that, he turned into a sword ray and disappeared into the distance. Only Yi Xian was left in the hall. Yi Xian got up and walked to the entrance of the hall. He looked into the distance and shook his head. There was not a single person in the sword sect. Weren't they afraid that someone would come to steal their nest? At this moment, a sword ray suddenly landed in front of the hall. When the sword ray dissipated, a female swordsman walked out. When the female swordsman saw Yi Xian, she was slightly stunned. Who are you? Yi Xian said, Yi Xian. Yi Xian? The female swordsman frowned. I've never heard of you. Never heard of you. Yi Xian blinked and said, I'm your young sect master. The woman sized up Yi Xian. Our sword sect only has a sect master. There has never been a young sect master. Did you give yourself that title? Yi Xian's face darkened. Nothingness dimension. Old tomb keeper who was sweeping the tombs suddenly looked up. Not far away from him, a woman in linen robes was walking towards him. Old tomb keeper frowned when he saw the woman in linen robes. The woman in linen robes walked to a tomb and glanced at it. She smiled. I heard that Yi Ling is in this tomb. I want to invite her to the Yin spirit world as a guest. After saying that, she turned to look at old tomb keeper. Do you want to help? You can give it a try. Old tomb keeper shook his head. I won't help. Do as you wish. The woman in linen robes nodded. She looked at the tomb and tapped it with her finger. A white light shot towards the tomb. Just as the white light was about to blast onto the tomb, a voice suddenly resounded from within the tomb. Who dares to disturb my sister Xiao? As soon as the voice resounded, a small fist suddenly blasted onto the white light. Boom! The beam of white light shattered into pieces. Chapter 1156. At the instant the white light shattered, a little girl appeared before the tomb. The little girl had a horn on her head and a tail on her back. The old man's eyelids twitched when he saw the little girl. It's this fellow again. It was this fellow who'd forcefully resisted his spear all those years ago, and then his spear and hand had broken. As soon as the little girl appeared, she gazed at the woman in linen robes. How dare you disturb my big sister Xiao? Believe it or not, I'll smash your head apart. The woman in linen robes gazed at the little girl and smiled, you can try. The little girl suddenly vanished on the spot and smashed her fist towards the woman in linen robes. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly as she smashed her fist forward. A head-on collision. The old man's eyelids twitched when he witnessed this scene. This woman is going head-on against the little girl? Bang! An explosion suddenly resounded, and then the woman instantly retreated explosively. However, she pressed her right hand down lightly when she retreated over 30 m, and then she stopped. However, the space behind her had instantly collapsed. It was pitch black. The old man's face instantly fell when he witnessed this scene. She'd actually resisted it. The woman glanced at her slightly cracked fist, and then she gazed at the little girl and smiled, "You're so strong." The little girl glanced at her fist and frowned slightly, "Why didn't I just punch you to death?" The linen-robed woman smiled and said, "Because you're just a clone." A clone. The little girl glanced at her own body, and then she gazed at the old man, "I'm just a clone?" The corners of the old man's mouth twitched. "Oh my God. Don't you know that you're just a clone? Oh my God." The old man almost fainted. Meanwhile, the little girl seemed to have figured out the situation she was in, and she gazed at the woman, "Take another punch from me." The woman shook her head, "No, no." The little girl frowned slightly, "Why?" The woman smiled, "I can't do anything to you with the strength of your body. Of course, you can't do anything to me without your main body. So, it's meaningless for us to continue fighting." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. She would never do meaningless things. At this moment, the little girl suddenly appeared in front of her. She looked at the linen-robed woman and pointed at the grave in the distance. "Sister Xiao is sleeping. Don't disturb her, or I'll kill you." The linen-robed woman smiled and said, "All right." The little girl blinked. "I'm threatening you. Aren't you angry? If I were you, I would beat anyone who dares to threaten me to death. Oh, except for a certain woman with a sword." The linen-robed woman blinked her eyes. "A woman with a sword?" The little girl said indifferently, "Actually, I'm not very afraid of her." As she spoke, she glanced at the old man in the distance. "It's true." The tomb keeper was speechless. "Why did you tell me if you weren't afraid?" The hemp-robed woman asked, "Is it that girl in the plain dress?" The little girl looked at the linen-robed woman. "You know her?" The linen-robed woman nodded. "Have you fought her before?" The little girl nodded. "I did." The linen-robed woman asked curiously, "Did he lose?" The little girl thought for a moment and said, "Actually, it can't be considered a loss. Right, it's 50-50. The linen-robed woman frowned slightly. "You have a 50-50 chance of winning against her?" The little girl looked at the linen-robed woman and was slightly angry. "You don't believe me?" The linen-robed woman thought for a moment and asked, "Your main body has a 50-50 chance of winning against her?" The little girl had an emotionless expression. "Yes." The linen-robed woman grinned. "I understand." She naturally believed the little girl. How could a peerless expert like the little girl possibly lie? The little girl was slightly puzzled. "What do you understand?" The linen-robed woman smiled. "I have a rough idea of her true strength." The little girl blinked. "You know?" The linen-robed woman nodded. "I have a rough idea." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. The little girl suddenly asked, "Do you want to beat her up?" The linen-robed woman smiled. "Can't I?" As soon as she finished speaking, she vanished into the distance. The little girl turned around to look at the tomb keeper. The tomb keeper's eyelids twitched. "What do you intend to do?" The little girl blinked. She said that she wanted to beat that woman up. The tomb keeper hesitated for a moment and said, "Is that woman very strong?" The little girl spoke indifferently. "She's just a so-so. In any case, I fought her to a draw." As soon as she finished speaking, she transformed into a ray of black light that entered the tomb. "A draw." The tomb keeper had a slightly strange expression on his face. His intuition told him that something wasn't right. Because the little girl before him was just like Yi Xian. Both of them were quite flashy. The tombkeeper turned around and looked towards the horizon. Did that woman really think that the little fellow had fought that woman to a draw? The sword sect. Yi Xian sat within Sword Hall while the swordsman woman sat opposite him. At this moment, Old Gu was present as well. The swordsman woman ceaselessly sized up Yi Xian with a curious gaze. Yi Xian was quite speechless. "Why are you looking at me?" The swordsman woman smiled. "You really are our young sect master." Old Gu spoke abruptly. "Aoji, do you still doubt me?" The woman named Aoji smiled. "No, Old Gu, why would you spout nonsense? I'm just curious." Old Gu shook his head. Aoji suddenly spoke. "Shall we spar?" Yi Xian looked at Aoji. "Spar with me?" Aoji nodded. "Let's spar. Don't worry, I won't hurt you." Yi Xian's expression became a little strange. To be honest, he was most afraid of swordsmen. Even if Arrow fought him, he wouldn't be afraid, let alone the woman before him. With his current strength, he could even devour Arrow's sword. Of course, he was still a little afraid of Arrow's slit-throat move. Aoji suddenly stood up and smiled. "Come, young sect master. Let's have a good spar." Old Gu was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly smiled. "All right. Let's spar." Old Gu looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. "It's fine. It's just a simple spar. It doesn't matter." Old Gu nodded. "Don't overdo it." Yi Xian nodded. Both of them left the sword hall and came out of the main hall. Aoji looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "You have to be careful." After that, she opened her palm and a green sword appeared in her hand. The next moment, a green sword ray suddenly slashed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian moved sideways and dodged the sword ray. At the same time, Aoji suddenly appeared in front of him and stabbed her sword at his chest. The sword was as fast as lightning. With a light tap of his right foot, Yi Xian retreated 100 feet. This retreat was just enough for him to dodge the sword. Akiji did not draw her sword. She looked at Yi Xian. At this moment, her expression became serious. Yi Xian was able to dodge her sword every time. What did this mean? It meant that Yi Xian's attainments in kendo were above hers. Aoji thought for a moment and said, "Aren't you going to draw your sword?" Yi Xian nodded. "Okay." After saying that, he suddenly disappeared. The speed of this strike caused Aoji's expression to change drastically. She did not choose to retreat, and instead thrust her sword forward. Because she could not retreat from this strike. Hong! As the sword ray shattered, Aoji instantly retreated 300 meters away. Yi Xian did not attack again. Instead, he looked at the sword in his hand. It was an ordinary sword. If he used the Tendo sword or the Executing Heaven sword, the Executing Heaven sword should be able to kill Akiji with this sword. Ever since he started cultivating with the Tendo sword, he realized that he had improved greatly in all aspects. Although he was only in the rebirth tier, he was completely capable of killing shattering void tier elites. Especially his current physical body. It was no exaggeration to say that in the entire fifth dimension, Yi Xian's physical body was number 1. Aoji did not attack again because she knew that Yi Xian had already shown mercy. Yi Xian put away his sword and looked at Old Gu. "Old Gu, can I go to the Netherworld Spirit World to have a look?" Old Gu hesitated, and then said, "Why not wait? Senior Sister Lu and the others will be back soon." Yi Xian nodded. "All right." At this moment, in the distant horizon, a sword cry suddenly resounded. Soon, a sword ray landed not far from Yi Xian and the others. The person who came was Lu Yunxian. Seeing Yi Xian, Lu Yunxian was slightly startled. Then, she smiled and said, "Little junior brother, you're here?" Yi Xian nodded. "Senior brother Lu." Lu Yunxian nodded slightly. "It's good that you're here. It saves me the trouble of going to fetch you." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Fetch me? What do you mean?" Lu Yunxian said in a low voice, "It's a bit serious." Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. "What do you mean?" Lu Yunxian looked at Yi Xian. "Senior sister Lu is injured." "Senior sister Lu?" Yi Xian was about to speak when he suddenly noticed that old Gu and Qing Ji's expressions had become solemn. Yi Xian gazed at old Gu. Old Gu spoke in a low voice, "Senior sister Lu is the best fighter in our sword sect right now." The best fighter. Yi Xian came to an understanding when he heard that. The best fighter is injured. Yi Xian's expression gradually became solemn as well. Lu Yunxian spoke in a low voice, "They might be targeting little junior brother." "So, senior sister Lu was just about to send me to fetch little junior brother. I never expected that you would come yourself. Did you encounter any mishaps along the way?" Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "I encountered the spirit race." Lu Yunxian frowned. "So, their target really is you?" Old Gu suddenly asked, "Can you contact the sect master?" Lu Yunxian laughed bitterly. "No. Senior sister Lu has already tried. The sect master should be extremely far away from here." Yi Xian was about to speak when Lu Yunxian suddenly raised his head and looked towards the horizon. In the next moment, his expression changed, "That woman has appeared again. Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light and vanished into the horizon. Yi Xian and the others hurriedly followed after him. A woman in a green dress stood with a sword in her hand, and a woman in linen robes stood 300 m away from her. The woman in linen robes had her hands behind her back as she looked up at the starry sky. No one knew what she was looking at. The woman with the sword looked at the woman in linen robes and was about to attack. Meanwhile, the woman in linen robes suddenly smiled, "Miss Lu, wait a moment. If you want to fight, then my spirit race will fight your sword sect to our heart's content." The woman with the sword frowned slightly, "What are you waiting for?" The woman in linen robes chuckled lightly, "I'm waiting for a woman to leave." The woman with the sword looked up into the starry sky. In a certain part of the starry sky, a woman in a plain dress appeared in the air, and wherever she went, the space would tear inch by inch. Soon, she arrived at a dead and silent part of the starry sky. Looking at the dead and silent part of the starry sky, she was about to attack when a middle-aged man suddenly appeared not far away from her. The person who came was Yu Bai, who had gone to the lower realm from the 6th dimension to find Tendo. Yu Bai looked at the woman in the plain dress and smiled faintly. "We want to invite Miss to the Union Hall for some tea. Miss won't refuse, right?" As he spoke, several dozen powerful auras suddenly appeared around the woman in the plain dress. All of them were at the peak stage of the Shattering Void tier. Several dozen elites at the peak stage of the Shattering Void tier, this lineup could only be described as terrifying. At this time, Yu Bai smiled again and said, "Don't worry, Mississippi. As long as that Yi Xian hands over the study, we won't harm Mississippi." Chapter 1157. In the starry sky, the plainly dressed woman looked at Yu Bai with a calm expression. Yu Bai looked at the plainly dressed woman, and though he had a smile on his face, he was extremely wary in his heart. They didn't dare to underestimate this woman who could make it all the way here. After all, an ordinary person couldn't make it all the way here. At this moment, the plainly dressed woman suddenly pointed at herself, "Use me to threaten him?" Yu Bai smiled, "Sort of." As he spoke, he glanced at the elites around him, and continued, "If you're smart, don't make a stupid choice, because that's really unwise. The plainly dressed woman looked at Yu Bai. At this moment, she was speechless. At this moment, Yu Bai suddenly made an inviting gesture. Sir, our union hall has already prepared tea, please. The plainly dressed woman shook her head, and said softly, looks like I was too kind. Yu Bai's eyes narrowed, and his right hand slowly clenched. Are you going to make a stupid choice? The plainly dressed woman opened her palm, and a sword suddenly flew out. In an instant, dozens of heads soared into the sky along with dozens of pillars of blood, extremely bloody. At this moment, aside from Yu Bai, all the super elites around him died. And these fallen elites, after their heads flew out, their eyes were filled with confusion. They didn't understand the situation even in death. How did they die? This was the only thought left in these elites' minds, instant kill with a single strike. And Yu Bai was stunned on the spot. At this moment, he suspected that he was dreaming. Those shattering void tier elites were instantly killed just like that. It was too unreal. At this moment, the plainly dressed woman suddenly said, "Where did you come from?" Hearing this, Yu Bai came back to his senses. He looked at the plainly dressed woman as if he was looking at a demon. What are you going to do? At this moment, he was truly terrified. Instant kill dozens of shattering void tier elites with a single strike? Even return to origin shattering void tier elites couldn't do it. Had this woman reached self-release? Yu Bai was completely dumbfounded. Just at this moment, the woman in the plain dress slowly closed her eyes. In the next moment, she suddenly turned her head and looked over. She could see a distance of 1,000,000 kilometers with a single glance. In the horizon that was 1,000,000 kilometers away stood a tall palace. The palace stretched across the horizon, and it was ancient and mysterious. The Union Hall. It could be said that this was one of the most powerful places in the sixth dimension, as well as the most mysterious place in the sixth dimension. This place was separated into the Literature Hall and the Martial Hall. The One Palace Hall was filled with scholars, but the Martial Arts Hall, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Martial Arts Hall's experts were the pinnacle of the sixth dimension. The sixth dimension had 7 absolute martial experts, and the Martial Arts Hall had 2 of them. A man stood in the sky above the Union Hall. He wore silver armor and held a silver spear. This person was one of the 6 experts of the sixth dimension, Xuezi. He was also the guardian of the Union Hall. His duty was to guard the Union Hall and deter thieves and rascals. Under his watch, nothing had ever happened to the Union Hall in the past 10,000 years. At that moment, Xuezi suddenly opened his eyes. He raised his head and roared furiously, "Impudent! Who dares to spy on me, you?" As he spoke, a wisp of sword light suddenly slashed through his throat. Chi! The head of one of the 6 great experts of the sixth dimension, Xuezi, flew out, and blood spurted out like a fountain. Xuezi's eyes were filled with disbelief when his head was sent flying. That sword was so fast that he didn't even have the strength to fight back. It was the fastest and strongest sword he had ever seen in his life. It was also the only time he didn't fight back. It wasn't that he didn't want to fight back, but he couldn't. That sword had directly severed everything he had. Even his soul couldn't escape. That sword had erased him. It had forcefully erased him. That sword didn't disappear. After Xuezi was killed, it directly slashed into the Union Hall. However, when the sword was about to slash into the Union Hall, the entire Union Hall suddenly shook violently. Then, a black light soared into the sky. The Union Hall's protective array. The array of the Union Hall hadn't appeared for tens of thousands of years. However, as soon as the array touched the sword light, it instantly turned into nothingness. Then, the sword light entered the Union Hall. Boom! The entire Union Hall turned into nothingness. Inside, countless experts of the Union Hall died. At that moment, the entire sixth dimension was shocked. Countless experts looked at the Union Hall. Someone attacked the Union Hall? Who was it? As of now, there wasn't a single force in the entire sixth dimension that could destroy the Union Hall alone. But at that moment, someone had actually attacked the Union Hall. Around the destroyed Union Hall, countless experts of the Union Hall were dumbfounded. These people were the ones who had escaped. The moment the Union Hall's guardian, Shuizi, died, a group of people had escaped. The moment the Union Hall's Great Array appeared, another group of people had escaped. However, not many had escaped. It could be said that at least 70% of the people in the Union Hall had died under that sword. It was a huge loss. At that moment, these people still didn't know who had attacked with that sword. Most importantly, the spiritual energy in the field was dissipating at an extremely fast speed. Within the Union Hall, there was a spiritual vein. This spiritual vein was the best spiritual vein in the sixth dimension. It was also because of this spiritual vein that the spiritual energy in the entire sixth dimension was balanced. This was because this spiritual vein was the core of countless protective arrays. Once this spiritual vein was destroyed, the countless protective arrays built by the Union Hall would all lose their effectiveness. Not only in the field, but the spiritual energy in countless places in the entire sixth dimension was also starting to dissipate. This problem was very serious. In the field, the expressions of the scholars of the One Palace were extremely ugly. In the distant starry sky, the woman in the plain dress withdrew her gaze and looked at Yu Bai. The latter stared at her. "You are a self-release realm expert." The woman in the plain dress glanced at Yu Bai. "Self-release realm? What kind of trash is that?" After saying that, she had already appeared tens of thousands of li away. Yu Bai's body gradually became illusory. Yu Bai looked at the depths of the starry sky, his mind blank. Self-release. This was not the highest known realm of the fifth dimension, but the sixth dimension. Escape from the Grand Tao, not within the Grand Tao, this was self-release. Since ancient times, this realm had always been a legend. Just now, when he saw the woman in the plain dress kill Yu Bai, he knew that she was at least at the self-release realm. Because Yu Bai was at the half-step self-release realm, and he had reached that level 10,000 years ago. However, a single sentence from the woman in a simple dress caused him to go mad. Self-release? What kind of trash was that? She was above self-release? Fifth dimension Tendo, you big scammer, this was Yu Bai's last thought. At the end of the distant starry sky, the woman in the plain dress tore through space. Her expression was calm and there were no ripples in her eyes. Just as she was about to leave the sixth dimension, an old man suddenly appeared in front of the woman in the plain dress. The old man looked at the woman in the plain dress and said, "Old man is the protector of this universe. Did you know that the sword just now destroyed the foundation of the sixth dimension? The spiritual chi in countless places will disappear, the entire sixth dimension." The woman in the plain dress suddenly said, "Do you have an opinion?" Saying that, she turned and slashed out. Chi. The sword slashed out tens of thousands of li wherever the sword passed, space shattered, mountains and rivers collapsed, and spiritual veins were destroyed. One sword heavily injured the sixth dimension. This moment was simply doomsday for the sixth dimension. If the first sword could be said to have shaken the foundation of this universe, then the second sword could directly destroy this universe. This sword directly heavily injured the entire sixth dimension. At this moment, at least half of the sixth dimension's origin was destroyed by this sword. It could be said that the spiritual chi world at the Union Hall had maintained for tens of thousands of years collapsed under this sword. The old man in front of the woman in the plain dress was dumbfounded. The power of this sword was beyond his imagination. The consequences of this sword were even more unimaginable. The old man looked at the woman in the plain dress and said with a trembling voice, "Who the hell are you?" The woman in the plain dress ignored the old man. She had already appeared thousands of li away. Behind her, the old man's body gradually became illusory. The old man was petrified and his eyes were filled with disbelief. He knew that he was already dead. However, he did not see how the woman in the plain dress had attacked. He had been instantly killed. What kind of monster was this? At the end of the starry sky, the woman in the plain dress stopped again. Not far in front of her stood a white figure. The sixth dimension's Tendo. The woman in the plain dress's sword had directly injured the origin of this universe. Besides the people of this universe, the Tendo of this universe was also injured. The Tendo looked at the woman in the plain dress and said, "Why did you do this?" The woman in the plain dress walked in front of the Tendo. The Tendo stared at the woman in the plain dress and said, "That sword of yours will cause countless living beings to die tragically. You are so powerful, why don't you have any mercy? Mercy and compassion?" The woman in the plain dress stopped. She looked at the Tendo and said, "I used up that toy a long, long time ago." The Tendo looked at the woman in the plain dress and said, "That sword of yours heavily injured the universe. It is an evil cause. Aren't you afraid of evil karma?" The woman in the plain dress looked at the Tendo and a trace of disdain appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Karma? That is used to bind mortals." The Tendo's pupils suddenly shrank. "You are really not part of the Grand Tao." At the beginning, it was just a guess. However, at this moment, she was sure. The woman in front of her was definitely at the self-release realm. She was no longer part of the Grand Tao, so how could karma affect her body? Thinking of this, the Tendo's heart was incomparably bitter. Why did the woman in front of him attack? Because the experts of the sixth dimension went to kill her. This was the cause, and her attack was the karma for those experts and this universe. This was the evil karma of the sixth dimension's experts and the sixth dimension's universe. At this moment, the woman in the plain dress suddenly opened her palm and a sword appeared in her hand. She looked at the Tendo and said, "I don't like your world anymore." Hearing this, the Tendo's expression changed. She immediately bowed respectfully and said, "I ask your honor to be lenient. Please be lenient to this universe." She knew that the life and death of the sixth dimension's universe was in the hands of this woman in the plain dress. The woman in front of her had the ability to destroy the sixth dimension. This time, the Union Hall had kicked an iron plate. Not only did they destroy themselves, but they also implicated the entire sixth dimension. Thinking of this, the Tendo bowed again and said, "I ask your honor to be lenient." The woman in the plain dress looked at the Tendo and said after a moment, "I will think about it." The Tendo, one good thought, thousands of rivers and thousands of mountains. One evil thought, the blue sea turned into mulberry fields. P.S. Erupt in advance. Because tomorrow I have to go out and line up to buy a mask. I have to go very early, otherwise there won't be any left. Therefore, erupt in advance today. If you think I'm good looking, then vote for me. Chapter 1158. Think about it. All of a sudden, the surroundings fell silent. The sixth dimension Tendo did not speak. Resist? She knew that all resistance was futile. There might be a chance of survival if she begged for mercy. After a while, the plain-dressed woman suddenly looked down and pointed somewhere. "Do you see that swordsman?" The Tendo looked down and said softly, "That young swordsman?" The plain-dressed woman nodded. "Yes." The Tendo looked at the plain-dressed woman. "What about him?" The plain-dressed woman looked at the Tendo. "He is my brother." The Tendo, the plain-dressed woman walked into the distance. When she passed by the Tendo, she suddenly said, "He will come here soon. Do you understand what I mean?" The Tendo nodded. "I understand. I will arrange it well." The plain-dressed woman nodded. The next moment, she was already at the end of the starry sky. Feeling this scene, the Tendo let out a long sigh of relief. No one saw that cold sweat was dripping down her forehead. Because in that instant, she had felt a killing intent. She knew that the woman in front of her really wanted to destroy this universe. That woman had the ability to destroy the universe. And the reason why the other party gave up should be related to that young swordsman. Thinking of this, the Tendo bent down to look. There was a trace of doubt in her eyes. Her brother? About a quarter of an hour later, the plain-dressed woman arrived in front of a barrier. It was the Cosmos Barrier. In the entire history of the sixth dimension, no one had ever passed through this universe. The plain-dressed woman walked in front of the Cosmos Barrier. With a wave of her right hand, a wisp of sword light slashed out. The indestructible Cosmos Barrier was instantly torn apart. At this moment, an ancient voice suddenly came from the crack. "Ignorant mortal, you dare to peep into the Tao world. Do you want your god's soul to be destroyed?" At this moment, the plain-dressed woman walked in. In the blink of an eye, a bloody head rolled out from the spatial crack. The crack in space closed up, and the head rolled and rolled. After the plain-dressed woman entered the crack, somewhere in the starry sky, the sixth dimension Tendo turned to look. Gradually, her expression became unprecedentedly serious. That woman actually left. They left. At this moment, Tendo's hands were trembling. "Release one?" "I'm afraid it's not just that." In the five-dimensional universe. Outside the Een spirit world, the linen-robed woman suddenly withdrew her gaze. She looked at the swordsman woman in the distance and said with a smile, "She's gone." Gone. There was a hint of relief in his voice. When that woman was around, she gave the Een spirit world too much pressure. As she had said, if that woman did not leave, the Een spirit world would never come out. But now, that woman had left. The linen-robed woman looked at the swordsman woman and said with a smile, "Miss Lu, didn't you want to fight? We spirits of the Dark Ones will fight you to our heart's content." Then, she gently waved her hand. Boom! Hundreds of teleportation formations suddenly appeared behind her. In the next moment, countless spirits of Dark Een rushed out from those teleportation formations. Seeing this, the swordsman woman's expression gradually sank. If it was a one-on-one battle, the spirits of 9 dead would never be able to defeat the sword sect. But now, the spirits of 9 dead obviously would not fight the sword sect one-on-one. Endless Een spirits continuously rushed out from those teleportation formations. Among them, there were actually hundreds of ruler-tier elites. Apart from them, there were also more than 60 elites at the peak stage of the Shattering Void tier. Seeing this lineup, the expressions of the swordsman woman and the swordsman behind her changed. Obviously, they had underestimated the Een spirit world. The linen-robed woman looked at the swordsman woman and said with a smile, "Miss Lu, we did not come out before not because we were afraid of your sword sect, but because of that plain-dressed woman. With all due respect, with the absence of your sword sect master, your sword sect cannot stop us." The swordsman woman glanced at the linen-robed woman. "Retreat." As her voice fell, the swordsman behind her turned into a flash of sword light, disappearing into the horizon. The swordsman woman looked at the linen-robed woman, and the sword in her hand suddenly flew out. In the distance, the linen-robed woman grabbed forward with her right hand. This grab directly caught the swordsman woman's sword, and at this moment, a flash of sword light suddenly slashed in front of the linen-robed woman. The linen-robed woman raised the swordsman woman's sword to block. Hong! The flash of sword light exploded, and the linen-robed woman retreated several steps, while the swordsman woman returned to her original position. The swordsman woman spread out her hands, and then suddenly clenched them. In an instant, tens of thousands of sword chi appeared behind her. Beside the linen-robed woman, the 2 old men were about to attack, but the linen-robed woman waved her right hand lightly, and the two old men retreated. The linen-robed woman took a step forward, and at this time, the swords behind the swordsman woman suddenly flew out. Chi, 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 chi. In an instant, the whole horizon was torn apart. The linen-robed woman pointed her finger forward lightly. Return to origin. As soon as her finger descended, a ripple suddenly appeared in the space before her, and in the next moment, the sword chi that covered the sky started to dissipate bit by bit. When he saw this scene, a trace of fear flashed in the eyes of the martial arts hall's hall master, Wuxia. The strength of the spirit of 9-yin had greatly exceeded his expectations. It could be said that colluding with the spirit of 9-yin was like asking a tiger for its skin. However, the higher realm didn't have a choice now. Since they were tricked by Tendo, the higher realm could be said to have suffered heavy losses. If they didn't rely on the spirit of 9-yin, then the higher realm wouldn't be able to resist Yi Xian and the others. Of course, the spirit of 9-yin being so strong was beneficial to the higher realm as well. As long as they could return to the sixth dimension, some sacrifices were worth it. In the distance, when the sword chi dissipated, the linen-robed woman suddenly took a step forward and blasted a fist forward. Under this fist, the space around the swordsman woman directly collapsed layer by layer. The swordsman woman didn't retreat but advanced instead. She took a step forward and pressed the sword between her brows while chanting silently. In an instant, she held the sword with both hands and slashed forward. Destroy. A ray of sword light suddenly slashed down fiercely from the center of the battlefield. This sword seemed to want to tear the heavens and the earth apart, and it was extremely shocking. Hiss. Wherever the ray of sword light passed, the space was directly torn apart, and the formidable strength of the linen-robed woman was also torn apart. The ray of sword light descended in a straight line and slashed towards the linen-robed woman. At the instant the ray of sword light descended, the linen-robed woman suddenly vanished. In the distance, the swordsman woman suddenly turned around and slashed down with her sword. The ray of sword light was like snow. Bang! The ray of sword light shattered, and the swordsman woman appeared where the linen-robed woman had been standing. At this moment, a fist tore through the air and blasted towards her face. The swordsman woman blocked it with her sword. Bang! The swordsman woman instantly retreated explosively by 300 m. After the swordsman woman stopped, she swung her sword horizontally. In the distance, the space around the linen-robed woman was suddenly sliced apart. In an instant, numerous rays of sword light flashed and slashed through the linen-robed woman's body. Hiss! Hiss! Layers of space around the linen-robed woman split apart, and the linen-robed woman herself became illusory. After a moment of silence, the ray of sword light suddenly shattered, and the linen-robed woman walked out from within. The swordsman woman looking at the linen-robed woman, she said, "You're not just a returning essence realm breaker." The linen-robed woman smiled, "Yes." The swordsman woman took a deep look at the linen-robed woman. Just as she was about to retreat, the linen-robed woman smiled, "You can't leave." The swordsman woman smiled, "You want to kill me?" The linen-robed woman retorted, "Can't I do it?" As soon as her voice fell, she stomped her right foot. Bang! In an instant, the space around the swordsman woman directly collapsed. In the next moment, a mysterious force continuously slashed towards the swordsman woman. At this moment, the swordsman woman was already in a state of illusory. At this time, the linen-robed woman's lily-white hand lightly swiped forward. With this swipe, the swordsman woman's body directly became illusory. In that strange space, the swordsman woman wielded her sword with both hands and slashed. Hiss! The ray of sword light tore. However, she was still trapped in that strange space. The swordsman woman's eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. She suddenly sheathed the sword in her hand, and in the next moment, she suddenly drew her sword and slashed. Ultimate heaven-slaying sword-drawing technique. With one slash, that strange space directly shattered. At this time, a ray of sword light suddenly appeared in front of the swordsman woman. The swordsman woman's pupils suddenly shrank. She dodged to the side, but it was still a little too late. With this flash, although she had dodged, one of her arms had been sent flying. A few hundred feet away, the swordsman woman looked at where she was originally standing. The linen-robed woman was standing there, and in her hand, there was a sword. Swordsman. The linen-robed woman was also a swordsman. Moreover, she had reached the peak of the third tier of the common sword realm. A swordsman who was at the origin returning realm breaker realm. If it was just the origin returning realm breaker realm, then it wouldn't be particularly terrifying. However, if she had the identity of a swordsman, and a swordsman who had reached the third level of the common sword realm, this wasn't just an ordinary level of terror. The linen-robed woman looked at the swordsman woman and smiled. "Miss Liu, I originally wanted to use the identity of a swordsman to have a fair battle with you, but I suddenly remembered that I'm the spirit of Yin tribe's clan leader. I can't do things according to my personal preferences. Therefore, I concealed my identity as a swordsman in order to catch you off guard and kill you. Because as of now, the only troublesome person in the sword sect is you." With that said, she opened her palm, and the sword in her hand suddenly flew out. This sword was very strange, and it gave people the feeling that it didn't exist. Seeing this sword, the swordsman woman held the sword with her left hand. She took a step forward, and then she stabbed with her sword. Sword tip against sword tip. Bang! A wave of sword light suddenly erupted in front of the swordsman woman. In the next moment, the swordsman woman started to retreat madly, and as she retreated, her sword started to crack bit by bit. When she retreated a few hundred meters, the sword in the swordsman woman's hand had been broken to the point only the hilt remained. Just as the linen-robed woman's sword was about to stab into the space between the swordsman woman's brows, a figure flashed by, and in the next moment, a man appeared in front of the swordsman woman. The person who'd arrived was Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't dodge, and he allowed the linen-robed woman's sword to enter his chest. Bang! In an instant, a powerful aura swept out from within Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian's body trembled, but he was completely fine. Invincible sword body. It was at this moment that the countless elites of the Spirit of Dark in the surroundings suddenly roared angrily like wild beasts. One of the Spirit of Dark in the peak stage of the Shattering Void tier pointed at Yi Xian, and roared hysterically, "It's him, his bloodline is exactly the same as that man's. It's him." Ah! In the field, countless Spirit of Dark roared madly. The way they looked at Yi Xian was as if they were looking at the enemy who'd killed their father. Yi Xian. Chapter 1159. Yi Xian was quite stunned as well. What do these Yin spirits mean? Why do they hate me so much? What the hell? Yi Xian was quite stunned. The woman waved her right hand lightly, and the Yin spirits that were about to charge forward instantly stopped. Even though they were still staring fixedly at Yi Xian, none of them dared to attack. The woman gazed at Yi Xian with a trace of surprise in her eyes. "When we investigated you earlier, they said that you could devour swords. I didn't really believe it, but I never expected that you would actually be able to devour swords. How did you do that?" Yi Xian glanced at the Yin spirit experts in the surroundings and smiled. "Do all of you really want to kill me?" The woman nodded, "Yes." Yi Xian smiled. "Don't tell me that your main objective for leaving the Yin spirit world this time is to kill me." The woman in linen robes smiled and said, "You're almost right." Yi Xian's expression froze, and he gazed at the woman a short while later. "Is there something wrong with all of you? That green-clothed man killed your ancestor, so go look for him. Why are you looking for me? Is it because you can't defeat the big one, so you look for the small one?" The woman nodded, that's right. Yi Xian was speechless. He'd almost cursed. The woman smiled, I'd intended to look for you, but I never expected that you'd come yourself. Just as well. As soon as she finished speaking, she was about to attack. Meanwhile, the swordsman behind Yi Xian suddenly used her finger like a sword, and she swiped it lightly in front of Yi Xian and her. Hiss! A ray of light flashed, and a spatial rift appeared. In the next moment, she brought Yi Xian along and entered the spatial rift. The woman frowned slightly, and she swiped it lightly with her fair hand. Bang! The spatial rift disappeared without a trace. However, Yi Xian and the swordsman had vanished. Seeing this, the linen-robed woman frowned slightly. Space Dao Law, at this time, Bai Yin appeared beside the linen-robed woman. Miss, are you going to the sword sect? The linen-robed woman smiled and said, the sword sect has sword formations. If we go, we will have to fight against those powerful sword formations, and we will suffer great losses. As she spoke, she turned her head and looked at the horizon. Cross the sword sect and go to the 5th dimension. Then they will come out on their own. With that, she disappeared on the spot. Behind her, there were countless powerful spirits of Dark Yin. They were densely packed and endless. The Yin spirit world had appeared. In a certain part of the starry sky, a woman in a white dress walked slowly while holding a small burnt fish. This woman was the 5th dimension Tendo. At this moment, the heavenly Tao suddenly stopped in her tracks. She turned around, and a moment later, she frowned. After a long silence, Tendo nibbled on the fish in his hand and continued to walk forward. At this time, a voice suddenly came from the side. When they arrive, the entire 5th dimension will be gone. Tendo stopped in her tracks and turned around. Not far to her right, there stood a woman. Xiao Dao. Tendo smiled and said, what do you think of this genius spirit of Dark Yin? The little Taoist said calmly, you already said that she is a genius. Tendo shook her head, actually, if she had endured a little longer, this universe would have belonged to the spirit of Dark Yin sooner or later. However, she made a fatal mistake. Xiao Dao frowned slightly, you mean she was too impatient? Tendo smiled and said, yes. Xiao Dao shook his head, no one can stop them. Tendo pointed below, do you know? There are many powerful beings in this universe. Xiao Dao frowned slightly, what do you mean? Tendo blinked, in the 4th dimension, there is a nether palace, there is a life-forbidden zone. In the 5th dimension, there is an old man guarding a woman. That's right. There are also the Tao laws of the prophet. When the plainly dressed woman is here, she is undoubtedly number one and can suppress everything. However, even if she is not here, it does not mean that the spirit of Dark Yin is invincible. Xiaodaoist looked at the sky and said, are the big shots you mentioned that haven't shown up related to Yi Xian? Tendo smiled and said, yes. Xiao Dao looked at Tendo deeply, you are too scary. At this moment, she suddenly realized that the woman in front of her was the scariest, even scarier than the spirit of Dark Yin. Xiao Dao said again, are you using him? Tendo nodded, yes. Xiao Dao shook his head, can you not be so straightforward? Tendo smiled and said, I feel that even if I am a bad person, should do it openly. Xiao Dao was speechless. Tendo said softly, actually, I am not using him. I am just taking advantage of the situation. The genius clan leader of the spirits of Dark Yin was indeed gifted and talented. Unfortunately, she cannot let go of her hatred. Hatred will lead her and the spirit of Dark Yin to destruction. Xiao Dao said in a deep voice, I always feel that the spirit of Dark Yin is not that simple. Tendo smiled and said, of course it is not that simple. Xiao Dao looked at Tendo and said, what do you mean? Heaven's Way smiled mischievously. Our spirit of Nine Yin's clan leader is fearless. However, she's still considered to be cautious. Even if she has some trump cards, she didn't make a move while the woman in the plain dress is still around. Xiao Dao was silent. Tendo suddenly said, Xiao Dao, don't make a move next. Let him face it himself. This is the karma between their family and the spirit of Dark Yin. Moreover, it is best that you and Arrow do not interfere now. Between the two of you, one has not fully grown and the other is injured. You do not have the ability to fight against the spirit of Dark Yin. With that, she looked at Xiao Dao and said, it is time for him to grow. With that, she turned around and walked away. Xiao Dao was silent for a moment, then he turned around and left as well. At the sword sect. Yi Xian brought the swordsman woman back to the sword sect. As soon as he returned to the sword sect, the swordsman woman suddenly brought him into a hall. Only she and Yi Xian were in the hall. Yi Xian looked at the swordsman woman in front of him and said, Senior Sister Lu? The woman said indifferently, you can call me Aunt Lu. Aunt Lu. Yi Xian's expression was a little strange. The woman looked at Yi Xian and said, you have reached the second level of the mortal sword technique? Yi Xian nodded. The woman nodded slightly and said, not bad. At this time, Lu Yunxian walked in and looked at Yi Xian and then at the woman, Senior Sister Lu, how are your injuries? The woman shook her head and said, it's no big deal. With that, he looked at Lu Yunxian and said, have the spirits left the spirit world? Lu Yunxian nodded and said, yes. The woman frowned and said, they didn't come to the sword sect? Lu Yunxian shook her head and said, they didn't come to the fifth dimension. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression changed. They went to the fifth dimension. How could the dimension of nothingness stop the spirit race? With that thought, Yi Xian turned around and left. At this time, the swordsman woman suddenly said, can you defeat the spirits? Yi Xian stopped and looked at the woman. The woman stood up and looked at Lu Yunxian and said, gather all the swordsmen. Lu Yunxian nodded and then looked at Yi Xian and said, don't be impulsive. With that, he turned around and left the hall. Only Yi Xian and the woman were left in the hall. The woman walked to the entrance of the hall and looked at the statue of the swordsman in the distance and said softly, we have underestimated the spirits. Yi Xian walked to the woman's side and said in a deep voice, that woman just now? The swordsman woman shook her head and said, it's not just her. That woman is called Guan Yin and she is the most outstanding genius in the history of the spirits. At first, I thought that she only had a high realm, but I didn't expect her to be a swordsman. Moreover, her sword Dao is so high. With that, she turned around and looked at Yi Xian and said, they have two goals. The first is to kill you and the second is to dominate the fifth dimension. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, just because I am the successor of the sword sect's leader, they want to kill me? The woman looked at Yi Xian and said, yes. Yi Xian was speechless and looked at the statue of the green-robed man in the distance. F***ck, he was tricked by this guy. At this time, nearly 100 sword lights suddenly landed in front of the hall. Yi Xian looked and found that there were a total of 119 swordsmen. There were very few people, but their strength was extremely terrifying. Because among these people, the lowest was a common sword tier cultivator and the lowest was a ruler tier cultivator. There were also more than 30 shattering void tier cultivators. This lineup, one had to admit, was really nature-defying. One had to know that these people were all swordsmen. Their battle prowess was many times stronger than an ordinary ruler tier elite. However, this lineup had no advantage in front of the spirits of dark. The spirits of dark were inexhaustible. The swordsman woman walked out of the hall and looked at the swordsman in front of her, let's not waste time. The spirits of dark have already left the dark spirit world, and they are now waiting for us to find them. Since that is the case, we will do as they wish. All swordsmen of the sword sect, at this point, she suddenly looked at Yi Xian and said, "From now on, all swordsmen will listen to young sect master's orders." Young sect master. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. What the hell? Listen to me? In the hall, the swordsmen also followed Yi Xian's example. When they saw Yi Xian, many of them showed kindness, while some showed curiosity. Obviously, they all knew about Yi Xian's background. In front of Yi Xian, the swordsman woman said, "I am injured and unable to fight anymore. I will leave the sword sect to you." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "Senior sister Lu, don't you still have senior brother Lu Yunxian and the others?" The woman looked at Yi Xian in the eye. "What? You don't have confidence?" Yi Xian shook his head. "No, I want to say," the woman suddenly said angrily. "Say what?" "I asked you to take the lead, so take the lead. What's with all the nonsense?" Yi Xian was shocked. "So fierce." The woman said again, "Any other questions?" Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. No problems." The woman nodded. "The rest is up to you. I want to recuperate. I hope that all of you are still alive before I come out." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned and walked into the hall. In the hall, over 100 peerless swordsmen looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian was speechless. He really did not expect this. Just like that, he directly changed from young sect master to sect master. Most importantly, these swordsmen in front of him did not seem to be hostile towards him. Yi Xian looked at the green robe man in the distance. He carefully looked at the green robe man. Gradually, his eyelids twitched. "Damn it, why do I look like this guy? P.S. I went to buy a mask today. Damn it, what a waste. I queued for almost an hour and could only buy 2, and I even used one myself." Chapter 1160. Was it an illusion? Yi Xian touched his face. It didn't make sense. At this moment, Lu Yunxian suddenly said, "Little junior disciple brother, what do we do next?" Yi Xian looked at Lu Yunxian. "Senior disciple brother Lu, to be honest, I've only just arrived at the sword sect." Lu Yunxian shook her head. "Let's not talk about that. Just tell me what to do next." After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, "Okay." After saying this, he glanced at the swordsman. "Kill the spirit tribe." After saying this, he turned into a sword projection and disappeared into the horizon. Below, over 100 sword projections soared into the sky and disappeared into the horizon in the blink of an eye. After Yi Xian and the others left, senior disciple sister Lu suddenly appeared at the entrance of the palace. She looked at the statue of the man in the green robe in the distance and said softly, "I hope you made the right choice." After saying this, she turned around and left. In the distant horizon, over 100 sword projections tore through the clouds, and over 100 powerful sword intents shook heaven and earth. To put it bluntly, almost all the powerful swordsmen in the 5th dimension were here. These over 100 swordsmen were enough to destroy heaven and earth. Along the way, Yi Xian's expression was gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, Lu Yunxian appeared beside Yi Xian with a smile. "What are you thinking about?" Yi Xian said in a solemn voice. Back then, the sect leader of the sword sect stopped the void spirit tribe by himself. Lu Yunxian nodded. "That's right. In fact, that battle was all thanks to the sect leader. If the sect leader hadn't killed all the super powerful spirit tribe cultivators, even our sword sect wouldn't have been able to stop them. This race's devouring and assimilation abilities are too terrifying." Yi Xian looked into the distance, and no one knew what he was thinking. Lu Yunxian suddenly said, "Are we going to go after them just like that?" Yi Xian said softly, "We have no choice. If we don't stop them, they will target this world." Lu Yunxian smiled. "You want to protect this world?" Yi Xian smiled, I want to protect my friends. Fu Wenzong, the Worldwide Academy, the Tian clan, and the Wu clan. These were all things that Yi Xian could not give up. Lu Yunxian laughed. You're quite similar to him. Both of you care a lot about the people around you. Yi Xian looked at Lu Yunxian. Him? Lu Yunxian nodded, yes, sect leader. Yi Xian was about to speak when countless shrill cries suddenly resounded from below. Yi Xian looked over, and soon, he frowned. Those were human voices. Countless humans were being assimilated by the dark spirits. At this moment, all the swordsmen in the sky suddenly stopped, because a linen-robed woman was standing not too far away from them. This woman was the leader of the spirits of Dark Yin, Guan Yin. Guan Yin smiled. You guys came pretty fast. Yi Xian walked towards Guan Yin and smiled. I heard that the reason why you didn't come out before was because the plain-robed woman didn't leave? Guan Yin nodded. Yes. Why? Are you using her to threaten me? Yi Xian smiled. No, no. I just want to tell you that your goal is to kill me, right? Come, I'm here now. If you spirits of Dark Yin have the ability, come at me. Guan Yin's lips curled up. How about this? You and I fight one-on-one? Yi Xian smiled. Sure. Lu Yunxian, who was standing beside Yi Xian, wanted to say something but hesitated. If Yi Xian lost, it would undoubtedly be a fatal blow to the morale of the sword sect. However, he didn't say it. Because if he stopped Yi Xian now, it would be equivalent to assuming that Yi Xian couldn't defeat Guan Yin. This would affect the morale of the spirits of Dark Yin. In the distance, Yi Xian walked towards Guan Yin. He opened his palm, and the executing heaven sword appeared in his hand. Bai Yin smiled. Come. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared on the spot. Qi. A cold light flashed. Guan Yin's jade-like hand swiped forward. This swipe caused the space in front of her to be torn apart. Yi Xian's sword pierced through the torn space. But right at this moment, the sword ray suddenly appeared in front of her. A trace of surprise flashed in Guan Yin's eyes. His understanding of space is actually so thorough. As she spoke, she clamped her fingers together. This clamp directly caught the sword ray. But right at this moment, a mysterious force suddenly suppressed her surroundings. Sword domain. The moment the sword domain appeared, Guan Yin narrowed her eyes. At this moment, a trace of seriousness appeared in her eyes. She suddenly slapped her left hand behind her. Bang! In an instant, the space she resided in was transformed into nothingness. Meanwhile, numerous rays of sword light slashed through her surroundings. Hiss! 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 For rays of sword light shot out like bolts of lightning and slashed the area Guan Yin resided in into pieces. As for Yi Xian, he'd already returned to his original position. Yi Xian raised his head to look at Guan Yin. Meanwhile, his rays of sword light suddenly vanished. In the next moment, a shadow flashed before him, and it was so fast that it couldn't be seen by the naked eye. But right at this moment, a mysterious force suddenly appeared around Yi Xian. Sword domain. At the instant the sword domain appeared, the shadow slowed down. Meanwhile, Yi Xian stabbed with his sword. Yi Xian didn't defend himself against Guan Yin's punch. He wanted to exchange his life for hers. But right at this moment, Guan Yin suddenly withdrew his fist and swept it horizontally. Bang! Yi Xian's sword was directly smashed to the side. At the same time, Guan Yin's right fist punched toward Yi Xian's face. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly let go of the executing heaven sword. His right hand grabbed Guan Yin's left hand that hadn't been withdrawn yet, and then he slammed it forward. At this time, Guan Yin's fist just happened to land on Yi Xian's face. Boom! Along with the sound of an explosion, Guan Yin and Yi Xian retreated at the same time. Both of them retreated hundreds of feet in an instant. In the distance, after Guan Yin stopped, she gently touched her face. Her face was slightly deformed. As for Yi Xian, although he'd taken a punch from her, he wasn't hurt at all. However, his expression was solemn. This was because when he collided with Guan Yin, a mysterious force had absorbed most of his strength. Meanwhile, the swordsmen behind Yi Xian exchanged glances, and their eyes were filled with gratification. They'd been quite worried in the beginning, but now it would seem like this young sect master of theirs wasn't simple at all. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, "Miss Guan, aren't you a swordsman? You can use a sword." "Use a sword?" Old Man Gu's expression became slightly strange. "Who doesn't know that you can devour swords? Use a sword? How dare you say that?" Guan Yin shook her head and smiled, "Young Master Yi, you must be joking. If you can devour swords, then wouldn't I be asking to be humiliated by using a sword?" As she spoke, she walked slowly towards Yi Xian. "I can kill you without a sword." As soon as she finished speaking, she'd appeared around 3 m in front of Yi Xian, and then she smashed her fist towards Yi Xian's face. This punch was very slow, and it seemed illusory and ethereal. Yi Xian closed his eyes slowly. He didn't use his body to resist this punch. He was very capable of resisting it, but he didn't do something so meaningless. Moreover, this punch wasn't simple at all. The execution heaven sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly transformed into the soul suppression sword, and then he stabbed it forward. As soon as he did, a mysterious force enveloped Guan Yin. The sword domain. He'd noticed that the sword domain was extremely effective against extraordinary experts. It could be suppressed. Guan Yin's brows knit together slightly when the sword domain appeared. She didn't retreat, and her fist shot straight at Yi Xian's head instead. On the other hand, Yi Xian's sword stabbed towards Guan Yin as well. Unfortunately, his fist was swifter than his sword. Boom! Yi Xian retreated dozens of meters in an instant, but Guan Yin also retreated dozens of meters. The moment she stopped, an extremely powerful soul force enveloped her. Soul-setting sword. Guan Yin frowned slightly. She opened her palm, and a white light suddenly appeared above her head. On top of the white light was a soul force, and this white light directly blocked the soul force. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared from his spot. Guan Yin looked in front of her, and her left hand suddenly punched out. This punch directly landed on Yi Xian's chest. It was very smooth, and Yi Xian directly retreated hundreds of meters. However, a small wound appeared on Guan Yin's throat. After Yi Xian stopped, he looked at his chest. At this moment, his chest had directly caved in. At a glance, it looked extremely terrifying, but in reality, it wasn't a big deal. Not only that, but his body was also recovering at an extremely fast speed. The Heart of Life. This was the effect of the Heart of Life given to him by the Tendo. As long as Yi Xian wasn't seriously injured or killed in an instant, his physical body would be able to continuously recover. Moreover, because of the Tendo sword, the spiritual energy of the world was continuously surging towards him. Simply put, when he fought with Yi Xian, it was equivalent to having the help of the world. Lu Yunxian and the others were shocked, and they saw that Yi Xian's physical body had almost instantly recovered. Such a strong physical body. The smile on Guan Yin's face gradually disappeared. She looked at Yi Xian. "I knew that your physical body was very strong, but I didn't expect it to be this strong." She had to admit that Yi Xian's physical body had greatly exceeded her expectations. Not only was it strong, but it also had the ability to heal. Was he really a swordsman? He was a body cultivator. Most importantly, she was also a swordsman. Under normal circumstances, it could be said that she could use her sword to break Yi Xian's invincible physical body. But the problem was that this fellow before her could devour her sword. What should I do? Her strongest point had become her weakest point in front of Yi Xian. It could be said that she was at a disadvantage when fighting Yi Xian, a huge disadvantage. Because Yi Xian's strength was clearly inferior to the swordsman, but she couldn't do anything to Yi Xian. What a headache! Meanwhile, Yi Xian stretched his body, and then he gazed at Guan Yin and smiled, "Come, let's continue." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure vanished on the spot. A ray of light flashed, and everywhere it passed, space exploded inch by inch. Guan Yin had an emotionless expression on her face. A ball of black energy had suddenly condensed at the center of her palm, but no one noticed it. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had appeared in front of her, and then she suddenly vanished. At this moment, she was extremely swift. However, Yi Xian's sword domain appeared once more, and it suppressed her speed. However, she was still able to smash her fist against Yi Xian's chest. This punch blasted Yi Xian 300 m away. As soon as Yi Xian stopped moving, Lu Yunxian's expression instantly changed drastically. "Shit! It's the Yin energy of death." As he spoke, he charged at Yi Xian, but it didn't take long for him to stop. Everyone here was stunned. Because the Yin energy of death on Yi Xian's chest was gradually being absorbed by Yi Xian. The undying body. After his undying body was strengthened by Tendo, he was invincible to all evil. It could be said that he was the bane of death energy and Yin energy. Because all the experts he'd devoured were peerless experts. Moreover, he cultivated Tendo's cultivation technique. So, death energy and Yin energy posed no threat to him at all. Guan Yin stared fixedly at Yi Xian, and then she shook her head a short while later. "You're being quite shameless." Chapter 1161. At this moment, Guan Yin really hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually be able to devour even her energy of death. What sort of monster is he? Is he a black hole? He absorbs everything. Guan Yin really felt helpless. Yi Xian was her natural counter. The experts of the sword sect hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually be able to absorb the energy of death. How did he do that? Lu Yunxian and the others had slightly strange expressions on their faces. Right at this moment, countless spirit of Yin suddenly appeared behind Guan Yin, and a dense mass of Yin spirits surrounded Yi Xian's group. The swordsman glanced at the surroundings. Even though they were facing so many Yin spirits, there wasn't a trace of fear on their faces. Yi Xian gazed at Guan Yin and smiled. "You're not going to fight one-on-one anymore?" Guan Yin shook her head. "I've changed my mind. I want to gang up on them." As she spoke, she glanced at the swordsman behind Yi Xian and smiled. "I have to admit that they're very strong. However, without the assistance of the sword sect's sword formation, they aren't a huge threat to us." Yi Xian smiled. "Is that so?" Guan Yin nodded. "You can give it a try." Yi Xian gazed at Guan Yin and roared furiously, "Ancestor summon! Ancestor summon!" Guan Yin's eyes narrowed slightly when she heard this, and she couldn't help but slowly clench her right hand. On the other hand, the expressions of the spirit of Yin experts changed drastically. "Ancestor summon! Who's the ancestor of the sword sect?" "It's that green-clothed man. Yi Xian intends to summon his ancestor?" Lu Yunxian and the others behind Yi Xian were slightly stunned. Ancestor summon? They wanted to summon their ancestor as well, but they weren't able to contact that green-clothed man at all. Right at this moment, a sword howl suddenly resounded from within Yi Xian's body. In the next moment, a sword suddenly shot into the sky from within Yi Xian's body. Hiss! Sword piercing the horizon. When they saw the sword in the sky, the countless experts of the spirit of Yin instantly roared hysterically. They roared as they retreated, and they were astounded to the extreme. The green-robed man's sword. Many of the dark spirits who had survived from that time recognized this sword. This was the green-robed man's sword. At this moment, Guan Yin's expression turned somewhat unsightly. The azure-robed man. He asked himself honestly, could the current him defeat that green-robed man? It was obvious that she was no match for him right now. Not to mention the green-robed man's true body, even if it was just a clone, she would not be able to deal with him. A clone was more than enough to deal a heavy blow to the spirits of 9 Yin. Countless spirit of Yin experts were still roaring madly with rage. Even though they were roaring furiously, they were retreating incessantly. They would never forget the fear that man and his sword had caused them. The swordsmen of the sword sect were also dumbfounded. Could this little junior brother really summon the ancestor? At this moment, even Lu Yunxian and Gu Gu were slightly doubtful. In midair, Yi Xian stretched out his hand and gestured. The sword appeared in his grasp, and then he pointed it at Guan Yin. Didn't you want to gang up on me? Come at me. The founding ancestor of my sword sect will fight your entire race by himself. Guan Yin gazed at Yi Xian. According to my knowledge, he isn't in this dimension. Yi Xian smiled. Is that so? Guan Yin suddenly said, kill. Obviously, she wasn't terrified by Yi Xian. However, none of the spirit of Yin experts behind her dared to move. Because they were truly afraid. After all, that man had almost annihilated the spirit of Yin race all those years ago. Guan Yin turned around to gaze at the spirit of Yin race, and she spoke fiercely, could it be that our race is going to live in fear for our entire lives? The expressions of the spirit of Yin race experts were quite unsightly. Right at this moment, an old man from the spirit of Yin race suddenly stepped forward. He glanced at Yi Xian, and then he said softly, this old man would like to see that swordsman again. As soon as he finished speaking, he started walking towards Yi Xian. The countless spirit of Yin race experts instantly stopped moving when they saw the old man walk over, and they didn't continue moving back. Moreover, some of the spirit of Yin race experts even followed behind the old man. At this moment, the eyes of all the spirit of Yin race experts carried a strand of resolution. Not only had the sword failed to deter them, conversely, it had even given them the courage to fight desperately. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. It seems like I've gone too far. Right at this moment, the sword in his hand suddenly trembled violently. In the next moment, a sword howl shook the heavens and the earth, and then a blood-red image suddenly appeared above Yi Xian. The swordsmen in the surroundings were instantly stunned when they saw this blood-red image. In the next moment, countless people were overjoyed. The sword spirit. It was the sword spirit of the sword sect's founding ancestor. On the other hand, the spirit of Yin race experts were stunned on the spot. Terror appeared in the eyes of many spirit of Yin race experts once more. Even the old man who led the group was stunned on the spot, and his eyes were filled with terror. On the other hand, Yi Xian was slightly stunned as well. This sword has a sword spirit. And it's alive. Yi Xian gazed at the blood-red sword spirit with a slightly strange expression on his face. Because he noticed that the aura emanated by the sword was very similar to the aura of his bloodline. The sword spirit suddenly vanished. Guan Yin suddenly took a step forward and smashed his fist forward. Bang! Guan Yin was instantly pushed over 1 kilometer back, and the sky had been transformed into an ocean of blood. Countless spirit of Yin race experts in the surroundings retreated repeatedly. Even the experts of the sword sect had retreated successively because the violent energy within the ocean of blood was too formidable. It affected one's mind. On the other hand, Yi Xian wasn't in a bad state because he was the least affected. After Guan Yin stopped moving, there was a mark between her brows that was neither deep nor shallow, and it was just enough to break her skin. Guan Yin opened her palm, and a sword appeared in her hand. In the next moment, she charged into the sky with the sword in her hand and slashed the sword spirit. Meanwhile, the sword spirit suddenly appeared in Yi Xian's hand. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he directly slashed his sword towards the sky. Hiss! A strand of blood-red sword energy tore through the sky with this slash. Bang! Guan Yin retreated explosively by over 3 kilometers, but the sword energy hadn't dispersed yet, and it swept through tens of thousands of kilometers. Everywhere the sword energy passed, an ocean of blood appeared, and countless spirit of Yin race experts perished. It was like purgatory on earth. Yi Xian was stunned. He gazed at the sword in his hand. I'm so strong. That slash from before killed at least a few tens of thousands of spirit of Yin race experts. The experts of the sword sect glanced at each other in the distance. The might of Yi Xian's attack was slightly abnormal. Guan Yin gazed at Yi Xian from afar, and her eyes were filled with astonishment. She hadn't expected that Yi Xian's attack would actually be so strong. It's because of the sword. Guan Yin gazed at the sword in Yi Xian's hand, and she knew that Yi Xian's attack from before was mostly because of this sword. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Kill! Kill!" At this moment, Guan Yin was blasted back by a single slash of his sword, and coupled with the reputation of the sword sect's founding ancestor, the spirit of Yin race could be said to have lost all their morale. It was the best time to attack. Even though there weren't many of them, the swordsman by his side was very good at fighting. When they heard Yi Xian's words, over 100 swordsmen suddenly rushed out. Over 100 super swordsmen attacked, and in an instant, the sound of swords resounded through the heavens and the earth. Yi Xian rushed at the forefront, and his target was Guan Yin. This woman was too good at fighting, and if he didn't restrain her, the sword sect swordsman wouldn't be able to stop her. Looking at Yi Xian who was rushing towards her, Guan Yin was expressionless. His face was expressionless. Kill! As soon as she finished speaking, she took the lead and rushed out. When Guan Yin rushed out, the spirit of Yin race experts behind her also rushed out. Guan Yin's prestige among the spirit of Yin race was still very high. The main reason was that everyone understood that at this moment, whoever retreated would suffer. Yi Xian rushed in front of Guan Yin and slashed down with his sword. Hiss! A blood-red ray of light slashed down. Guan Yin didn't choose to use her sword because it was meaningless against Yi Xian. The moment Guan Yin rushed forward, she immediately became illusory, and the moment she became illusory, a mysterious force directly suppressed her. Sword domain. At this moment, a trace of ferocity flashed through Guan Yin's eyes, and she stomped her right foot on the ground. Bang! The heavens and the earth trembled in fear. Yi Xian's face instantly turned pale. Meanwhile, Guan Yin smashed her fist towards Yi Xian. She'd resisted the suppression of the sword domain and smashed her fist towards Yi Xian. She intended to shatter Yi Xian's sword domain as well. However, Yi Xian didn't dodge this punch, and he slashed his sword at Guan Yin instead. Not to mention Guan Yin, even he himself wouldn't be able to resist this attack. Because the sword in his hand belonged to the green-clothed man. Moreover, it was a living sword spirit. This sword spirit's strength wasn't inferior to Guan Yin. However, its might required swordsmen to be able to bring forth its full might. Guan Yin didn't hesitate at all when facing this attack. She immediately withdrew her fist, and then she smashed it against the blade of Yi Xian's sword at a strange angle. Bang! Meanwhile, Guan Yin seized the opportunity and smashed her fist towards Yi Xian's chest. This punch caused the space in the surroundings to crack apart. However, Yi Xian didn't pay any attention to this punch. At the instant that his sword was slashed askew, he immediately let go of his sword, and then he smashed his fist towards Guan Yin's chest. Fist for fist. Bang! Along with an explosion, Yi Xian and Guan Yin instantly retreated explosively, and at the instant that Guan Yin retreated, the blood-red sword slashed towards her. Guan Yin's expression changed when she witnessed this scene. This sword is attacking on its own. What the hell? She didn't have the time to think, and she suddenly pushed her arms forward. Bang! Blood-red light exploded, and Guan Yin instantly retreated over 1 kilometer again. Moreover, there were numerous blood-red sword marks on her body. On the other hand, the blood-red sword had returned to Yi Xian's hand. This was a sword that had a mind of its own. Yi Xian gazed at the blood-red sword in his hand. At this moment, he suddenly realized how terrifying this sword was. The soul-calming sword had a spirit as well, but it didn't have such formidable combat strength. It could be said that the soul-calming sword was a sword, and the sword in his hand wasn't just a sword anymore. It could be said that it was a swordsman. A sword that understood the sword Dao. In the distance, Guan Yin's expression gradually became gloomy. She noticed that even though Yi Xian had taken her punch head-on, he was fine. She had 3 killer moves. The first was realm suppression. However, this realm suppression could be broken by Yi Xian. The second killer move was the sword. It could be said that after the woman in the plain dress left, her sword Dao was at the peak in this world. However, Yi Xian was able to devour the sword. The third killer move was the death qi. However, Yi Xian was able to devour even the death qi. This Yi Xian was simply her nemesis. As if she had thought of something, Guan Yin suddenly raised her head. She looked towards the depths of the starry sky. Soon, she saw a white figure. 5th dimension Tendo. Guan Yin's expression was somewhat ferocious. "You're a good Tendo." In the starry sky, Tendo suddenly stopped and shook her head. "You want to blame me for the destruction of the upper realm? You want to blame me for the destruction of the 6th dimension? Now, your spirit clan is also blaming me. I'm in a difficult situation. P.S. By the way, have you all started work?" Chapter 1162. In the sky, the Dark Yin tribe and the Sword Sect swordsmen were still fighting. Although the Sword Sect had fewer people, the swordsmen's combat strength was too terrifying. Each of the swordsmen could fight against 100. However, the Dark Yin tribe's experts were too many. Therefore, the Sword Sect could not gain any advantage. Guan Yin did not make a move because she knew that she could not do anything to Yi Xian. Not only her, the Dark Yin tribe could not do anything to Yi Xian. He could devour the aura of death. Yi Xian looked around. Although he knew that these swordsmen were strong, he was still shocked when he saw the swordsmen's combat strength. These swordsmen were too terrifying. If it was not for the Dark Yin tribe's numbers, the Sword Sect could really crush the Dark Yin tribe. Many people. Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin. At this moment, Guan Yin suddenly said, "Dark Yin death formation." As soon as she said that, 4 black-robed old men suddenly appeared behind her. The 4 black-robed old men quickly chanted. Gradually, phantoms condensed above their heads. These phantoms emitted an extremely evil aura. When he saw these phantoms, Yi Xian frowned. He looked at Lu Yunxian. Lu Yunxian suddenly said, "Gather." As soon as she said that, more than 100 sword rays suddenly gathered. All the swordsmen stood back to back. Around them, in addition to the endless Dark Yin tribe, there were also countless phantoms. These phantoms covered the sky, making the whole sky look like purgatory. Lu Yunxian suddenly said, "Sword formation." As soon as she said that, more than 100 swordsmen raised their swords and pointed to the sky. Buzz! More than 100 sword cries soared into the sky, shaking the universe. At the same time, more than 100 powerful sword aura swept around like sharp blades. The Dark Yin tribe's experts who were close to them died instantly. Guan Yin's eyes narrowed when she saw this. At this moment, she was slightly shocked. The combat power of these swordsmen was much more terrifying than she had imagined. Meanwhile, Lu Yunxian suddenly said, "Attack! Attack!" Over 100 voices suddenly resounded, and then over 100 rays of light suddenly flew up into the air and slashed at the shadows in the distance. At that moment, the phantoms pounced on the swordsmen. Chi 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 chi. In the blink of an eye, those phantoms were directly slashed into pieces. More than 100 sword lights pierced through the air and headed straight for those Spirit of 9 Yin powerhouses. Guan Yin was expressionless. Spectre. As soon as she finished speaking, the 4 black-robed old men behind her suddenly raised their hands. Above their heads, an enormous spatial crack appeared. In the next moment, some undead wielding scythes rushed out. These undead directly charged towards the sword lights. Chi 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 chi. Soon, countless sword lights began to shatter. Yi Xian frowned slightly. These specters are quite formidable. Lu Yunxian and the others were just about to attack again when Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of them. Yi Xian gazed at the specters, and then he opened his palm and the soul-suppressing sword appeared. Guan Yin's expression instantly changed drastically, retreat. However, she'd only just finished speaking when the soul-suppressing sword in Yi Xian's hand flew out. In an instant, all the specters that had just appeared were completely absorbed. Bang! The soul-suppressing sword shook violently, and then a powerful strand of soul energy shot into the starry sky. At this moment, everyone was shocked. Even Yi Xian was quite shocked. After all, the specters absorbed by Little Soul this time are really extraordinary. Bang! Suddenly, the soul-suppressing sword shook once more, and then another strand of soul energy surged out. Yi Xian was slightly stunned, and then he was overjoyed. The soul-suppressing sword is about to break through. Seeing this, Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin and said sincerely, "Thank you." Everyone, Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian with an ugly expression. Yi Xian suddenly smiled and said, "Miss Guan, can we talk now?" Guan Yin smiled and said, "Talk about what? Why should I talk about it?" Yi Xian turned to look at Lu Yunxian, "Kill them. Don't hold back, killing one isn't a loss, killing two is a gain." After saying that, he directly charged at Guan Yin. Lu Yunxian was slightly stunned, and then he shook his head and smiled, "They all have the same temper." After saying that, he directly charged out. Over 100 swordsmen attacked without any warning, which made the Spirit of 9 Yin powerhouses somewhat dumbfounded. These swordsmen are poisonous. So ruthless? Guan Yin looked at the swordsman charging at her, and her expression gradually became ferocious, "Kill." At this time, the Spirit of 9 Yin absolutely could not retreat. Once they retreated, their momentum would weaken, and they would be pursued. That would be even more disadvantageous to the Spirit of 9 Yin. After hearing Guan Yin's words, the Spirit of 9 Yin powerhouses directly charged at Lu Yunxian and the others. At this time, Yi Xian had already rushed in front of Guan Yin, but Guan Yin did not attack, but retreated more than 10 feet. At the same time, 2 Spirit of 9 Yin elders blocked in front of Yi Xian, while Guan Yin rushed at Lu Yunxian and the others. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian frowned. He could block Guan Yin, but Lu Yunxian and the others might not be able to. This woman's sword could be said to be superior to all the swordsmen present. Yi Xian was about to chase after Guan Yin, but the 2 Spirit of 9 Yin powerhouses blocked him. Yi Xian slashed with his sword. Hiss! A blood-red sword light slashed out. Bang! The 2 Spirit of 9 Yin powerhouses were directly forced back, and in the next moment, they appeared in front of Yi Xian again. Yi Xian frowned slightly, and he raised his sword and slashed again. Bang! Along with two explosions, the two Spirit of Nine Yin powerhouses were forced back again. Both of them were unable to defeat Yi Xian, who was holding a blood-red sword, but they did not fight to the death, and they just dragged him down. In the distance, with the addition of Guan Yin, the sword sect was directly suppressed. Because no one could resist Guan Yin, who was holding a sword. Seeing this scene, some people frowned deeply. If this continued, the sword sect would be in a more and more disadvantageous position, and some people might even die. Since the beginning until now, not a single member of the sword sect had died. These swordsmen really aren't just for show. But now, with the addition of Guan Yin, Yi Xian knew that Guan Yin had the ability to kill. Suddenly, the sword in his hand trembled violently, and then it transformed into a phantom that appeared in front of him. Yi Xian gazed at the sword spirit. "You?" The phantom spoke abruptly. "I'll help you stop the two of them." Yi Xian blinked. "Are you sure?" The phantom opened its palm. "Come." As soon as it finished speaking, a sword suddenly flew out from within Yi Xian's body. It was the Executing Heaven Sword. The phantom held the Executing Heaven Sword and charged at the two old men in the distance. Yi Xian was flabbergasted by this scene. Using a sword? This sword is too creative. Yi Xian didn't give it any further thought, and he turned around and charged at Guan Yin. Guan Yin seemed to have noticed something, and she suddenly turned around and stabbed her sword at Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian didn't dodge and allowed her sword to stab into his stomach. At practically the same time, he smashed his fist towards Guan Yin's head. Bang! His fist struck empty air because Guan Yin had retreated 300 m away. After Guan Yin stopped, she looked at Yi Xian's stomach. At this moment, her sword was gradually vanishing. Guan Yin frowned when she saw this. Devour sword. What kind of physique is that? I've never seen such a physique. It could be said that Yi Xian was in an invincible position when facing a swordsman. Most importantly, this fellow's physique isn't good, but he can devour swords and the energy of death. Is there anything he can't devour? Meanwhile, Guan Yin seemed to have thought of something, and she suddenly turned around and looked towards the distance. Her expression instantly became strange when she saw the sword spirit slashing at the swordsman. Using a sword? This scene is quite strange. Meanwhile, the shrill cries of the Spirit of Yin experts resounded. After Guan Yin was gone, the swordsmen grew more and more ferocious. Even though they were few in number, their imposing aura overwhelmed the Spirit of Yin experts. Guan Yin slowly clenched her fists when she saw this, and no one knew what she was thinking. Suddenly, Yi Xian said, "Miss Guan, are you going to use some trump card?" Guan Yin gazed at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian smiled. "Go ahead. I want to use my trump card as well." Guan Yin smiled. "Are you trying to scare me?" Yi Xian shook his head. "You're so powerful, how could I possibly scare you?" Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian. "Come, let me see what other trump card you have." As she spoke, she suddenly raised her head to look at the horizon, still not going to make a move. As she finished speaking, a powerful presence suddenly appeared in the horizon, and soon, a middle-aged man appeared not far from Yi Xian. It was the martial hall master of the upper realm, Wuxia. And behind him, there were still 6 elites at the peak of the Shattering Void tier. These were the last few elites of the Shattering Void tier. Wuxia glanced at Guan Yin, and said in a low voice, "Miss Guan, forgive me for being blunt, but the woman in the plain dress has already left, and now is the best time to kill him." He knew that the woman in front of him definitely had a trump card. No trump card to suppress Arrow, Tendo, and Xiao Dao. Guan Yin smiled. "Hall Master Wu, I only need you to put in a little effort now, is this not enough?" Wuxia shook his head. "Miss Guan, I don't mean anything else, I just want to tell Miss Guan that now is the best time for us to kill him. This person. As he spoke, he pointed at Yi Xian who was absorbing the sword in the distance. This person is very devilish. If we don't use all our strength to kill him, there will be endless troubles in the future. He was deeply touched. Ever since the upper realm chose to seize the bookstore, the upper realm was simply too miserable. Especially after being tricked by Tendo, the upper realm's vitality was greatly damaged, and they didn't even have the qualification to challenge the sixth dimension. Of course, he didn't know that the sixth dimension was actually also very miserable. Guan Yin pondered slightly, and said, "My people will be here soon. Once they arrive, he will definitely die." Hearing this, Wu Zongxing was slightly stunned, but soon, he nodded and looked at Yi Xian, and was about to make a move. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Wait, wait, wait." Wu Zongxing and Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled, "Both of you, since you can't kill me now, why don't we stop for now and wait for your people to arrive? When your people arrive, you can make your move, what do you think?" Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian, "You're that confident?" Yi Xian smiled, "You call for people, I'll call for people too, let's call for people together." Guan Yin smiled, "All right. Then let's wait for a while." After that, the surrounding spirits of Nine Yin and the swordsman stopped at the same time. Yi Xian glanced at Guan Yin. Guan Yin's eyes were full of smiles, as if he had something to rely on. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes, and said in his heart, "Xiao Linger, is the box still there?" Xiao Linger said, "Yes." Yi Xian said, "All right, listen to me later, come out when I tell you to, and then open the box." Xiao Linger hesitated, then said, "She doesn't seem to be very good at fighting." Yi Xian said, "It's fine. Didn't she say she knows how to call for people? Let's let her out and let her call for people." Xiao Linger. Chapter 1163. In the sky, the battlefield suddenly became quiet. Both sides stopped fighting. Both sides were calling for help. It was a bit strange. The spirit tribe's powerhouses surrounded Yi Xian's group. Obviously, they were afraid that Yi Xian's group would leave. At this moment, Lu Yunxian suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. She glanced at Guan Yin's group and said, "We will rush out with you." He knew clearly that they were at a disadvantage. Because there were too many spirit tribes members. If they fought a protracted battle, the sword sect wouldn't be able to outlast them. Of course, if the sword sect chose to perish together, the spirit tribe would also suffer a lot. It was also for this reason that the spirit tribe didn't choose to attack again. If they continued to fight like this, they would perish together. The spirit tribe could win, but it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Hearing Lu Yunxian's words, Yi Xian shook his head. He knew that they couldn't escape. There was no way out. Even if they could rush out, what about the void dimension? They were in a passive position. He could only choose to fight the spirit tribe head-on. At this moment, Guan Yin suddenly smiled and said, "As far as I know, you don't seem to have many people to call for you." Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin, "Really?" Guan Yin nodded, "If you want to call for Tendo, Arrow, or Xiao Dao, I can tell you that they definitely won't come. Even if they come, it will be meaningless." Yi Xian suddenly said, "You are afraid." Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian, "What am I afraid of?" Yi Xian smiled, "Aren't you afraid?" Guan Yin smiled, "No, I am just curious. I am curious about what other powerhouses will appear in this universe." Yi Xian was silent. At this moment, he was actually a bit worried. Is that white guy reliable? Also, who will Guan Yin call? At this moment, the blood sword flew to Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at the blood sword in his hand. "Can you contact him?" This him was naturally the man in green. The sword did not respond. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before asking, "Senior, can you contact him?" The sword still did not respond. Yi Xian was speechless. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian suddenly looked up into the sky. He tried to contact Arrow and Xiao Dao, but there was no response from either of them. Did something happen? Yi Xian frowned and looked at Guan Yin. Guan Yin smiled and said, "Don't worry, they're not dead yet. The one we want to kill is you. Of course, if they don't know what's good for them, I don't mind eliminating them." Yi Xian was silent. He knew that Arrow and Xiao Dao must have been pinned down by the spirits of 9 dead. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian raised his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. "Tendo?" As if he knew what Yi Xian was thinking, Tendo suddenly smiled and said, "Are you worried about Tendo?" Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin and said, "I know. You must have sent someone to pin her down." Guan Yin smiled and said, "Yes. So, I'm very curious, who will you call out?" Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin and said, "You went to look for Tendo?" Guan Yin smiled and said, "Can't I?" Yi Xian shook his head quickly and said, "Yes, yes. Look for Tendo." Yi Xian looked a little strange. Damn, he knew how bad this woman was. Never underestimate Tendo. He had been with that woman for so long, but he still couldn't see through her. He only knew that he shouldn't have any ideas about this woman. This woman's dirty tricks are so damn scary. The martial arts hall envoy wanted to say something but stopped. As for Tendo, he was even more afraid. This woman was different from the 6th dimension Tendo. The 6th dimension Tendo was more normal, but this woman was not normal at all. She was always smiling on the surface, but secretly, she was a sly old B***tch. She was on par with the plain-dressed woman. The plain-dressed woman was only at the origin returning realm breaker realm. How could she say such a thing? And they actually believed it. Fortunately, not everyone went to look for the plain-dressed woman. Otherwise, the upper realm would have been annihilated. When he heard that Guan Yin went to look for that woman, he felt a sense of uneasiness. Trap that woman? The upper realm thought so too, but what happened in the end? In the end, the upper realm was almost annihilated. However, he still didn't say anything because the spirit of Dark Yin clan leader in front of him didn't look like a fool. He definitely wouldn't look down on Tendo. At this moment, Guan Yin suddenly said, "I have to say that I underestimated her. If I didn't guess wrongly, half of the credit for your strange physique is due to her, right?" Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin and said, "I remember Miss Xiao Dao said that the spirit of Dark Yin clan was driven out." Guan Yin smiled and said, "She really knows a lot." Yi Xian was a little curious. "Miss Guan, I'm very curious. Where did you come from?" Guan Yin shook her head and smiled. "You want to ask who we will call, right?" As she spoke, she slowly walked towards Yi Xian and said, "It seems that you are a little weak." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Actually, I want to fight with you one-on-one. If I lose, the Sword Sect will retreat, and the 5th dimension will belong to the spirit of Dark Yin clan. If you lose, the spirit of Dark Yin clan will retreat." Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and said, "Don't you think that you are very shameless? How about this, besides you can casually send someone else to fight with me one-on-one." Yi Xian was silent. Besides him, in the entire 5th dimension, perhaps only Tendo could defeat this woman. Arrow's swordsmanship was not inferior to Guan Yin's, but her realm was lower than Guan Yin's. This was a sore point. As for Xiao Dao, her strength had not fully recovered, so she definitely could not defeat this woman. If her strength was fully recovered, this woman would definitely not be able to defeat Xiao Dao. Only Tendo was left. This enigmatic woman. At this time, Guan Yin suddenly turned her head and looked at the horizon, her gaze piercing through the galaxy. "Tendo, don't you want to protect this universe? Do you dare to fight with me? In the distant starry sky, Tendo, who was roasting fish, suddenly stopped and shook her head. No, no, I can't defeat you. You are the most powerful. Guan Yin squinted her eyes and said, are you that scared? Tendo smiled and said, don't you want to compete in calling people? You should call people instead. Guan Yin retracted her gaze and looked at Yi Xian. It seems that we can only compete in calling people. Yi Xian nodded. Since you want to compete in calling people, let's call people. Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and slowly closed her eyes. Before this, she had already investigated all the experts in the fifth dimension. The one who posed the biggest threat to the Dark Yin race was the plain-dressed woman. However, she had already left. Next were Tendo, Arrow, and Xiao Dao. However, she had already sent people to restrain these three people. Besides these three people, there was only Yi Xian's Xiao Ta left. Dao Laws. She had sent people to search for the disappeared Dao Laws, but they had found nothing. Even if the Dao Laws gathered, she was not afraid. There was nothing for her to worry about. In the distance, Yi Xian's expression was calm. However, the swordsman by his side wasn't so calm. The current situation was disadvantageous to the sword sect. If more experts appeared among the Dark Yin race, then the sword sect would be in an even more serious situation. Lu Yunxian looked at Yi Xian and asked, are you confident? Yi Xian was just about to speak when Guan Yin suddenly raised her head and looked towards the depths of the starry sky. At this moment, everyone looked towards that direction as well. In the depths of the starry sky, space suddenly split apart, and then a man walked out from within it. The man was extremely tall, and he was at least twice the size of an ordinary human. He wore black armor and a helmet with two horns on it. At the instant he appeared in the starry sky, the space where he stood split apart, and then the starry sky in an area of over 100 kilometers instantly became like a spider web. The starry sky couldn't endure his strength at all. The expressions of the members of the sword sect instantly became solemn when they witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, 30 armored figures with spears in their hands suddenly appeared behind the giant. All 30 of them were actually origin destroyers. 30 were origin destroyers. The expressions of the members of the sword sect instantly became extremely solemn. Yi Xian frowned as well. 30 were origin destroyers. Such a force wasn't just abnormal, it was heaven-defying. Even the martial arts hall's master, Wu Zangxing, had an unprecedentedly solemn expression on his face. The strength of the Dark Yin race was entirely capable of posing a threat to the entire sixth dimension. At this moment, the giant suddenly looked up. In the next moment, he took a step forward. This step directly traversed the star domain. He and the 30 or so super powerhouses arrived in the sky where Yi Xian and the others were. At the instant he appeared, everyone in the surroundings felt a powerful pressure descend upon them. The giant disregarded everyone and walked straight towards Guan Yin. Every single step he took caused the starry sky to tremble violently. When he arrived before Guan Yin, he knelt down on one knee and said, "Young Patriarch." The young patriarch. The expressions of the members of the sword sect fell when they witnessed this scene. Are they experts from the spirit race? But it didn't take long for them to reject this thought. Because they noticed that many of the spirit race members had bewildered expressions in their eyes. Meanwhile, Guan Yin suddenly gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. "Weren't you curious about where we came from? Let me tell you, we're from the distant spirit region." The spirit region. Yi Xian fell silent. He knew a little about Dao Yi because the books that Tendo had collected had an introduction to it. However, it hadn't provided much information about it, and he hadn't paid much attention to it. He hadn't expected that the spirit race was actually from this place. Yi Xian gazed at Guan Yin. "Weren't all of you driven out?" Guan Yin nodded. "We were." But now, we can return at any time. All the spirit race experts were stunned when they heard this. We can return? What's going on? Meanwhile, an old spirit race expert walked over to Guan Yin, and he spoke with a trembling voice, Patriarch, is this true? They'd been exiled all those years ago. The spirit region was their home. The thing that countless spirit race experts wanted to do the most was to return. However, they didn't dare to do so. Guan Yin spoke softly, Elder Chen, it's true. I'm the young patriarch of the spirit region's spirit race now. Elder Chen was stunned, and then he spoke with a trembling voice, how could this be possible? Meanwhile, the giant suddenly gazed at Elder Chen. The young patriarch is an extraordinary genius. She attained the convergence realm before the age of 20, and the patriarch has appointed her as the young patriarch of our race. Elder Chen hurriedly knelt before Guan Yin, and he spoke with a trembling voice, greetings, young patriarch. Countless spirit race experts knelt down successively, and it was especially so for some of the older ones. At this moment, all of them were extremely emotional, and some even started crying. After they were driven out, they'd been wandering for too long. Guan Yin slowly closed her eyes. A short moment later, she glanced at the spirit race experts here. Once we've taken our revenge, we'll return home. Return home. Countless spirit of Yin experts roared madly with fury. Guan Yin gazed at Yi Xian. Do you think my objective is to dominate the fifth dimension? No, this place isn't worthy of our attention. Our true objective is to kill you. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. Didn't you want to compete in getting reinforcements? You can do it now. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, Shaoling, Shaoling, appeared by Yi Xian's side while holding a box in her hands. Under everyone's gazes, Shaoling gently opened the box, and soon, a white furry little fellow crawled out. When they saw the white little fellow, the members of the sword sect were stunned. A moment later, countless swordsmen suddenly shouted in unison, "Bye." The white little fellow rubbed her drowsy eyes and glanced at the surroundings. In the end, she looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian hurriedly handed her a candied fruit. The white little fellow grinned and took the candied fruit. Yi Xian pointed at the spirit race experts in the distance. They're going to attack us. Can you call some people over to help? Call for help. The white little fellow blinked, and she turned to look at Guan Yin and the others. When she saw so many experts, she hesitated for a moment before returning the candied fruit to Yi Xian. Then, she went back into the box and closed it herself. Everyone, Yi Xian. Chapter 1164. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene. What's going on? Yi Xian and the others stared at each other in bewilderment. The spirit of 9 Yin was stunned as well. What the hell is she doing? Why is she hiding? Meanwhile, Shaoling suddenly patted the box lightly, and a pair of lively and large eyes could be seen. Yi Xian was speechless. Shaoling blinked. "Bye, can you help us fight? There are too many of them, and we can't defeat them." The white little fellow glanced at the spirit of 9 Yin, and then she hesitated for a moment before she closed the box. Yi Xian slapped himself on the forehead when he saw this. It's over. Shaoling spoke abruptly, you can call for help if you can't defeat them. Call for help. Meanwhile, the white little fellow suddenly opened the box, and she leaped out. Call for help. The white little fellow gazed at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian hurriedly gave her a tanghulu. Here you go. The white little fellow took the tanghulu, and then she gazed at Guan Yin from the spirit of 9 Yin. She waved her claws swiftly as if she was saying something. Yi Xian quickly nudged Shaoling. Shaoling gazed at Guan Yin. I said that if you give her a tanghulu, she'll let all of you go today. Yi Xian and the others were dumbfounded. The swordsmen from the sword sect were having a headache as well. This little fellow. Guan Yin and the other spirit of 9 Yin roared with laughter. Guan Yin gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. Did you ask this little fellow to be funny? Little Ling suddenly muttered a few words to the white little fellow. Meanwhile, the white little fellow suddenly flared up with rage, and she waved her little claw. In an instant, all the spirit energy in the heavens and the earth vanished completely. The spirit of 9 Yin and the other spirit of 9 Yin were stunned by this scene. Yi Xian was stunned as well. Just like that, the spiritual energy was gone. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Ling. What did you say to her? Xiao Ling blinked, and then he said, I told her that those people were coming to steal the candied haws. Yi Xian was speechless. At this time, the little white fellow had already floated out. She looked at Guan Yin and the others, waving her little claws rapidly, as though she was trying to express something. Xiao Ling suddenly said, she said, all of you should kill yourselves. Yi Xian was speechless. The little white fellow looked at Xiao Ling and blinked. That didn't sound right. Right at this moment, the spirit giant in the distance suddenly said, that's the spirit ancestor. There was a hint of excitement in his voice. The spirit ancestor. Upon hearing the giant's words, Guan Yin's eyes were filled with excitement. The spirit ancestor. This was an existence that didn't even exist in spirit realm. Guan Yin looked at the little white guy. Where is your main body? Main body. A strange expression appeared on Yi Xian's face when he heard this. Doesn't this woman know that this little fellow is in cahoots with the green-robed man? The little white fellow blinked when she heard Guan Yin's words, and then she waved her little claws rapidly. Xiao Ling looked at Guan Yin. Give me some candied haws, and I'll forget about what happened today. Guan Yin suddenly burst into laughter. She looked at Yi Xian. This little fellow you called over is really hilarious. She waved her hand lightly as she spoke. Kill. The Void Spirit Tribe powerful beings beside her instantly charged forward as soon as she finished speaking. A vicious expression flashed through Yi Xian's eyes when he saw this. It looked like he had no choice but to fight with his life on the line. However, right at this moment, Xiao Ling suddenly said, they're here to steal the candied haws. Yi Xian, the little white fellow, suddenly shot into the sky. In the next instant, she suddenly opened her mouth. Shou. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. What the hell? Right at this moment, a tomb suddenly exploded apart in the distant dimension of nothingness. In the next moment, a ray of dark light shot through space and arrived in front of the little white fellow. Meanwhile, the giant Yin spirit had arrived in front of the little white fellow as well. The dark light dispersed to reveal a woman, and then she turned around. In the next moment. Hiss. Everyone watched with astonishment as the giant Yin spirit's head flew into the air. Guan Yin's expression instantly changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. Stop. All the other spirit tribe experts stopped moving. Guan Yin stared fixedly at the woman who emanated a dark light in the sky. Who are you? Everyone in the surroundings was looking at the woman. It was the same for Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian's eyes were filled with bewilderment at this moment. That woman was the Yin spirit. However, the Yi Ling in front of him gave him a very unfamiliar feeling. What's going on? Yi Xian walked towards Yi Ling. However, an invisible force obstructed his path. The little white fellow flew over to Yi Ling, and then she sized up Yi Ling. A short while passed before she grinned, and then she hugged Yi Ling affectionately. Yi Ling rubbed the little white fellow lightly, and then she gazed at the spirit tribe experts in the distance. In her eyes, there were two balls of dark light. Guan Yin stared fixedly at Yi Ling, her soul has taken possession of a physical body. Her soul has taken possession of a physical body. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he gazed at Yi Ling and spoke fiercely, "Who exactly are you? Why have you taken possession of my younger sister's physical body?" Meanwhile, Yi Ling turned around to glance at him. "I have no ill intent. She'll be fine." Yi Xian gazed at Yi Ling. "Who are you?" Meanwhile, the little white fellow started waving her claws swiftly. Yi Xian gazed at Xiao and Xiao spoke in a light voice, "Big Sister Xiao." "Big Sister Xiao?" Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. He was about to speak when Yi Ling gazed at Guan Yin and the others. Guan Yin opened his palm, and a sword suddenly flew out and slashed towards Yi Ling. Yi Ling's face was emotionless. She waved her hand, and a ray of dark light flew out. Bang! The sword in Guan Yin's hand was slashed into pieces by the ray of dark light, and then it shot into the surroundings and instantly annihilated a few tens of thousands of spirit tribe experts. The expressions of the spirit tribe experts changed drastically when they witnessed this scene. "Who's she?" Guan Yin stared fixedly at Yi Ling. "Who exactly are you?" Yi Ling gazed at Guan Yin. She waved her hand, and a ray of dark light slashed out. Wherever the dark light passed, the space was directly annihilated. Seeing this, Guan Yin's pupils suddenly shrank. She took a step forward, put her palms together, and slashed forward. A ray of sword light slashed out. This sword light alternated between real and fake, and it was extremely strange. Returning element realm breaker. However, this sword light shattered the moment it came into contact with the ray of dark light, and the ray of dark light slashed towards Guan Yin. Guan Yin's eyes were filled with disbelief. Her opponent's realm was higher than hers. How was this possible? How was this possible? How could there be such an expert in the fifth dimension? At this moment, a phantom suddenly appeared in front of Guan Yin. The phantom stretched out his right hand, and a ray of black light quietly condensed like a black hole. Bang! That ray of dark light was blocked. In front of Guan Yin, the phantom solidified. It was a middle-aged man. Seeing this middle-aged man, the 30 or so experts from the spirit realm hurriedly knelt on one knee. "Greetings, Guardian Lin." Guardian Lin turned his head to look at Guan Yin. "Retreat." Guan Yin frowned slightly. Right at this moment, Yi Ling suddenly vanished on the spot. Guardian Lin suddenly turned around and blasted out a punch. Bang! Under this punch, Guardian Lin instantly retreated explosively for thousands of meters. Moreover, his body even became illusory. He was instantly killed. When she saw this, Guan Yin suddenly shouted angrily, "Retreat! Retreat!" When they heard her voice, the spirit of 9 Yin experts instantly retreated like a receding tide. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Kill." As soon as he finished speaking, he and the swordsman by his side charged out. He naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity. "I'll take your life while you're down." All the swordsmen charged out. Yi Ling looked at the white little fellow in front of her. The little fellow blinked, and then it hugged her. She waved her little claws swiftly as if she was trying to express something. A short moment later, Yi Ling grinned, "All right." The white little fellow grinned, and then she rubbed her head lightly against Yi Ling's face. Yi Ling raised her head and looked towards the distance. She saw Tendo at the end of the horizon. Tendo stopped and smiled. "You're not in a very good state right now, so you should head back as soon as possible." Yi Ling withdrew her gaze, and then she brought Xiao and the little fellow along as they vanished on the spot. The Yin spirit world. Guan Yin led all the spirit of 9 Yin experts back into the Yin spirit world. Yi Xian was just about to charge in when Lu Yunxian stopped him. Yi Xian gazed at Lu Yunxian. Lu Yunxian shook her head, we can't go in. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he recovered from his shock. At this moment, he recalled that the Yin spirit world wasn't an ordinary place. It was a world of death, and it wasn't a place they could enter. Wait. Yi Xian suddenly frowned. Xiao Dao had said that the Yin spirit world was filled with death energy and Yin energy, and there wasn't any spirit energy. However, his physique was capable of devouring death energy and Yin energy. If I go in. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched when he thought up to this point. Damn it. This place is a great nourishment for me. The more Yi Xian thought about it, the more he felt that it was feasible, and he was about to charge in. Meanwhile, Lu Yunxian suddenly said, "Can you defeat them after you go in?" Yi Xian hurriedly stopped. Right. Even though I can devour the death energy, would the spirits of 9 Yin allow me to do that for nothing? When he thought up to this point, Yi Xian glanced at the entrance to the Yin spirit world, and he sighed to himself. If he was allowed to enter and devour all the death energy in the Yin spirit world, then his strength would definitely increase explosively, and his body would definitely become even stronger. Meanwhile, Yi Ling appeared here with the white little fellow and Xiao Ling. Yi Ling gazed at the Yin spirit world, and no one knew what he was thinking. Yi Xian gazed at Yi Ling, Senior. The person before him wasn't Yi Ling, and there was someone else's soul within the Yin spirit world. He was still slightly worried when he thought up to this point. As if she knew what Yi Xian was worried about, Yi Ling suddenly said, "She needs to stay with me for a while longer." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "Senior, this." Yi Ling gazed at Yi Xian, "I won't harm her. Don't worry." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and patted the white little fellow's head lightly, and then she transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the horizon. Yi Xian was still quite worried, and he wanted to chase after her. Meanwhile, the white little fellow stood in front of him, and she waved her little claws swiftly. Yi Xian gazed at Xiao Ling, and Xiao Ling said softly, "She said that Big Sister Xiao is a very, very good person. Don't worry. Big Sister Xiao." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he asked, "Who is Big Sister Xiao?" The white little fellow blinked and waved her little claws. Xiao Ling gazed at Yi Xian. "She said that Big Sister Xiao is Big Sister Xiao. She's very good at fighting." Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 1165. Sister Xiao. Yi Xian was speechless. However, he did not chase after Yi Ling. This little white fellow trusted Sister Xiao so much. Yi Ling would definitely be fine. Yi Xian took out a stick of candied haws and passed it to the little white fellow. He smiled and said, "Thank you." If this little fellow had not called this mysterious Sister Xiao over, things would have been very troublesome. 30 over Origin Breaking Realm Elites. This lineup was too heaven-defying. Spirit Realm. Yi Xian looked towards the nether spirit world. This matter was not over yet. At this moment, Guan Yin suddenly appeared at the entrance of the nether spirit world. Lu Yunxian and the rest frowned. What else did this woman want to do? Yi Xian smiled and said, "Lady Guan, why did you come out? It's safer inside." Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and said, "I underestimated the person behind you." Yi Xian shook his head and said, "You were the one who wanted to compete. To be honest, I really did not want to rely on anyone. However, I had no choice. You insisted on competing with me. I was also very helpless." Guan Yin stared at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian smiled lightly and said, "Lady Guan Yin, to be honest, I feel that since the nether spirit race can return to spirit realm, why don't you return to spirit realm? Why must you fight to the death with me?" Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and said, "Because I want to kill you." Yi Xian shook his head and said, "It's definitely not just because of that." Guan Yin smiled and said, "Yi Xian, things have just begun. Your enemies will be more than you can imagine." Yi Xian frowned and said, "I don't understand. Did I destroy the entire universe in my previous life?" Guan Yin smiled coldly and then turned to enter the nether spirit world. Yi Xian was enraged and almost couldn't help but charge in. "What? There are more enemies than I can imagine?" At this moment, Lu Yunxian suddenly said, "Let's go." Yi Xian pondered for a moment and then nodded. Right now, they couldn't do anything to the spirit of Nine Yin. However, the other party didn't dare to come out rashly. Yi Xian looked at Lu Yunxian, "Senior brother Lu, all of you return to the sword sect first. I'm going to meet someone." Lu Yunxian nodded. "All right. Be careful." Yi Xian nodded, then looked at the little white guy and Yi Ling, "Let's go." The little white guy blinked and pointed at himself. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Yes. I want you to do me a favor." The little white fellow waved its little claws excitedly. Xiao Linger said, "Did she say she was going to buy Tanghulu?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "Yes." After that, he disappeared into the horizon with the little white fellow and Xiao Linger. After a while, Yi Xian brought the two little guys to the Tendo pawn shop. Within the pawn shop, Yi Xian saw Xiao Dao. Xiao Dao smiled, "You're still alive." Yi Xian hurriedly called the little white fellow over. Xiao Dao was stunned when she saw the little white fellow. The little white fellow sized up Xiao Dao, and then she waved her little claws swiftly. Obviously, she still remembered Xiao Dao. Yi Xian shot a glance at Xiao Dao. Xiao Dao hesitated for a moment before he said, "I'm sorry for what happened in the past." The little white fellow blinked, and then she stretched out her little claws. Xiao Dao was stunned. Yi Xian hurriedly gestured, and Xiao Dao understood. She hurriedly took out a Tanghulu and passed it to the little white fellow. The little white fellow's eyes instantly lit up when she saw the Tanghulu, and then she put it away and grinned happily. Xiao Dao was speechless when he saw this. So this little fellow can be bribed with a single Tanghulu. Why did I go to the trouble of seizing it by force? A single Tanghulu can solve the problem. At this moment, Xiao Dao's heart was filled with extremely complicated emotions. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Can I heal her?" The little white fellow looked at Xiao Dao. She sized up Xiao Dao, and then she spat lightly. In an instant, countless strands of violet energy surged toward Xiao Dao. Bang! In an instant, Xiao Dao was enveloped by a strand of violet energy. Xiao Dao's eyes slowly closed within the strand of violet energy. At this moment, her entire body was trembling. Yi Xian noticed that some black dots had suddenly seeped out from within Xiao Dao's body. Yi Xian instantly frowned when he saw those black dots. Danger. That was what he felt. However, those black dots instantly vanished without a trace when they came into contact with the little white fellow's black dots. On the other hand, Yi Xian noticed that the aura within Xiao Dao's body was growing stronger and stronger. How strong was this Xiao Dao? Yi Xian was extremely curious. With less than 10% of her strength, she could already kill an ordinary shattering void tier elite. If she completely recovered, at this moment, the little white fellow suddenly retracted her little claw. At this moment, she was already very illusory. She was only an image, not even a clone, so it was impossible for her to stay in this world for too long. Yi Xian looked at the little white fellow, and asked, "Are you all right?" The little white fellow grinned, and waved her little claw a few times. Yi Xian hurriedly looked at Xiao Linger, and Xiao Linger said softly, "She's going to leave." Yi Xian hesitated, then looked at the little white fellow, and asked, "Where is your main body?" The little white fellow pointed her little claw towards the horizon. Yi Xian was speechless. I don't understand what you're pointing at. At this moment, Xiao Dao suddenly opened her eyes. In her eyes, 2 balls of black flames flashed, and in the next moment, black flames suddenly appeared all over her body. Yi Xian hurriedly said, Miss Xiao Dao, have you completely recovered? Xiao Dao shook her head, and said, no. I only have about 40% of my peak strength now, 40%. Yi Xian blinked, and asked, how strong? Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian, and asked, do you want me to punch you? Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. He had suffered at the hands of Tendo before, so he didn't want to be beaten. Xiao Dao looked at the little white fellow, and at this moment, the little white fellow was already becoming more and more illusory. Xiao Dao said softly, thank you. The little white fellow grinned, and then looked at Yi Xian and Xiao Ling. She waved her little claw, and in next to no time, she vanished completely. When he saw the little white fellow vanish completely, a feeling of reluctance arose in Yi Xian's heart. The little fellow had really helped him a lot. At this moment, Xiao Dao suddenly looked at Yi Xian, and said, thank you as well. She knew that if Yi Xian hadn't brought the little fellow here, her injuries definitely wouldn't have recovered so quickly. Yi Xian smiled, and said, do we still need to be polite? Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian, and said, come, let's go look for Tendo. As soon as she finished speaking, she took Yi Xian with her and vanished on the spot. Not long later, Xiao Dao brought Yi Xian to a starry sky, but they didn't see Tendo. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Dao, and Xiao Dao said solemnly, this woman is hiding. Yi Xian was slightly confused, and said, hiding? Xiao Dao said solemnly, something is definitely going to happen. As she said this, she looked at Yi Xian, and said, that Guan Yin from before brought over 30 origin returning realm and breaking realm experts? Yi Xian nodded his head. Xiao Dao said solemnly, this lineup is very abnormal. Yi Xian said softly, I know that these people are from that spirit realm. I don't know how many experts like this there are in spirit realm. Xiao Dao was silent for a moment, and said, I know a little about this spirit realm, Dao Yi. Yi Xian asked, what kind of place is that? Xiao Dao said softly, a rather special place. That place has its own universe. It doesn't belong to the 5th dimension, nor does it belong to the 6th dimension. It is independent from the 5th dimension and the 6th dimension, and the development of that place isn't any worse than the 6th dimension. Logically speaking, that place's spirit energy is much better than here, so they shouldn't be interested in this place. Could it be? As she said this, she seemed to have thought of something, and her pupils suddenly shrank, and she said, could it be because of the 5th dimension? Yi Xian frowned, and said, 5th dimension? Xiao Dao said solemnly, if it's because of the 5th dimension, then there's a big problem. Yi Xian was slightly confused, and said, if it's because of the 5th dimension, they should go to the 6th dimension. Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian, and said, book house. Book house. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he flew into a rage. He directly took out the book house and used the prison pagoda to attack it. At this time, a voice floated out, host's strength is insufficient. Hearing this voice, Yi Xian was instantly enraged, and he fiercely punched out. Bang! The book house didn't fly out. The one who flew out was Yi Xian, and this time, he flew several thousand zhang away. Not only that, but his own fist also cracked open. Seeing this, Yi Xian was dumbfounded. How could this thing be so hard? A trace of surprise flashed in Xiao Dao's eyes. She carefully looked at the book house, and this book house seemed to have some tricks up its sleeve. At this time, Yi Xian walked in front of the book house, looked at it, and said, this book house can protect itself. Xiao Dao nodded, and said, and it's very strong. Very strong. Yi Xian said solemnly, but it can't be opened now. He was still a bit angry about this book house. Many people wanted to snatch this thing, but he just couldn't do anything about it. What could this thing do? It was simply a hot potato. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, "How about I just give it away?" Xiao Dao looked at Yi Xian. "If this thing can really resist the fifth dimension tribulation, then you should give it away. What will you do when the fifth dimension tribulation comes?" Yi Xian was silent. Not to mention, if this thing could really resist the fifth dimension tribulation, then it would be extremely useful to him. At this time, Xiao Dao looked around and said softly, "I just don't know where that Tendo went." "That woman." Yi Xian looked at Xiao Dao. "Why are you looking for her?" Xiao Dao said softly, "She must know about the situation in spirit realm. If she doesn't come out, then she must be playing some trick." Yi Xian was about to speak, but at this time, the space in front of him suddenly split open. Then, a sword light floated out, and within that sword light, there was a voice. After a moment, Yi Xian's face darkened. Xiao Dao asked, "What's wrong?" Yi Xian said solemnly, "The sword sect sent a letter saying that the spirit of 9 is gathering experts." Xiao Dao frowned. "Gathering experts?" Yi Xian nodded. "I have to go back." Xiao Dao nodded slightly. "I will go with you." Yi Xian looked at Xiao Dao, but Xiao Dao was expressionless. "Let's go." After saying that, she and Yi Xian disappeared into the distant horizon. Great desolate country. In a room, two women sat facing each other. These two women were Arrow and Tendo. Tendo looked at Arrow and said with a smile, "You see, in fact, returning to the origin and breaking through the boundary is so simple." Arrow looked at Tendo. "What about the third level of the common sword?" Tendo blinked. "Then it's even simpler. Do you know why you can't break through? It's because of obsession. Some people can use obsession and override it. For example, the woman in the plain dress. She has a strong mind, and obsession is nothing to her. But Arrow, you are different. To put it simply, you are still enslaved by the sword, but she is enslaving the sword. No, it is the sword that is relying on her." After saying that, she stood up and left. When she walked to the door, she said again, "Swordsman, swordsman, a swordsman enslaved by the sword is the master of the sword, and a swordsman enslaved by the human is the master of the sword. I'm not asking you to let go of your obsession, I just want you to look at it from a different perspective." After saying that, she looked at Arrow and said with a smile, "Just like many times, there is darkness in front of you, but as long as you turn around, there is light." After saying that, she left the room. Inside the room, a sword's hum rose into the sky, straight into the clouds, and at the same time, a powerful aura shook the sky. In the distance, Tendo said softly, "What a genius." After saying that, she disappeared on the spot, and after a while, she went directly to the fourth dimension. In the starry sky, Tendo looked around and snorted, "Guan Yin, you bitch, you dare to threaten me, you just wait." After saying that, she walked into the distance. P.S. We have already cleared out here, but because of a guy who returned from abroad, another appeared, causing many people and many places to be quarantined. When the incident happened, many people desperately ran out. When it was safe here, they desperately came back, and wanted free treatment. To be honest, I think I am thick-skinned enough, but compared to them, I feel that I am far inferior. Chapter 1166. In the starry sky, Tiandao walked leisurely. Soon, she arrived in front of a pitch-black hall. Nether Palace. Tendo walked to the entrance of the palace. She glanced at the statues inside the palace, smiled, and whispered something. A moment later, one of the statues suddenly cracked, and a woman floated out, but it was not her real body. Tendo looked at the woman with a grave expression. "He is in danger now." The woman said, "He has his own life." Tendo quickly shook her head. No, no, his karma now was brought by your generation. The woman said, how can he grow without some hardships? Tendo sighed softly, he is still a child. The woman, Tendo said, you see, it is very unfair to him now. He is silently enduring pressure that he should not have to bear at his age. It is a bit cruel for you to stand by and do nothing. The woman looked at Tendo, it is very troublesome for us to come to this place. Tendo smiled, I know, I can open the door for you. With my help, it will not be too difficult for you to come here. The woman was silent. About 15 minutes later, Tendo smiled and left Nether Palace. After leaving the Nether Palace, she leisurely arrived at another place. Forbidden Zone for life in the four-dimensional universe. After Tendo entered the Forbidden Zone, she looked around. The surroundings were hazy, she could not see anything. At this time, a shadow suddenly appeared not far from Tendo. Tendo smiled, I came uninvited, please forgive me. The shadow said, Tendo, is there something you need? Tendo nodded, he is in danger. The shadow said, what does it have to do with us? Tendo smiled, did not say anything, turned around, and left. At this time, the shadow suddenly said, in this universe, besides you, no one can kill him. Tendo stopped, she smiled, Spirit Realm is taking action. Snatch the library. The shadow was silent for a moment, then said, understood. Tendo nodded and turned to leave. About an hour later, Tendo came to a river. There was a woman sitting on a rock by the river. She was holding a fishing rod and was fishing. Beside the woman were two other people. It was Yan Jia and Lian Qian. When the two women saw Tendo, a trace of surprise flashed in their eyes. Tendo walked in front of the three girls, she smiled, hello. The woman holding the fishing rod glanced at the Tendo and said with a smile, what brings the Tendo here? Tendo looked at the fishing rod lady and smiled. Are you really going to ignore him? The fishing rod woman said indifferently, he's not the master. The Tendo laughed, what do you mean? The fishing rod woman said softly, Mister will never come back. Tendo shook his head. You're wrong. The fishing rod woman said softly, Tendo, I know you are very good at bluffing. You can try. Tendo sat to the side and looked at the distant sky. She said softly, what's your mister's objective? The fishing rod woman fell silent. Heavenly Tao laughed and said, what he wants to do, he can't do it himself. You should understand. The fishing rod woman looked at Tendo, that woman killed Mr. Tendo smiled, is that why you haven't gone looking for him? The fishing rod woman smiled, why would I go looking for him? I said it. He's not Mr. Tendo stood up and left. Lian Qian and Yan Jia wanted to say something but hesitated. At this moment, the fishing rod woman suddenly said, you're giving up just like that? Tendo shook her head, I feel that your mister is very sad. The fishing rod woman suddenly looked at Tendo. In the next moment, the world turned pitch black like a black hole. At the same time, a formless pressure locked onto Tendo, but Tendo's expression was calm. The fishing rod woman looked at Tendo. Tendo smiled, isn't he sad? He used his life as the price to create eternal peace, but what happened in the end? In the end, the Tao laws that he created don't trust him. The fishing rod woman walked in front of Tendo and stared at Tendo, I said it. He's not Mr. Tendo looked straight at the fishing rod woman, let me ask you. Other than him, who else can fulfill your mister's wish? The fishing rod woman looked at Tendo and didn't say anything. Tendo sneered, do I have to rely on you? The fishing rod woman slowly closed her eyes. Tendo was expressionless, you're not helping him. You're helping your mister. As for that plain-dressed woman, she destroyed all of your mister's vitality. But you should understand that it was your mister who schemed against her first. Moreover, who can say that he isn't your mister? It doesn't make sense for you to blame him and that plain-dressed woman. Because your mister was the first to play chess. In the end, that Yi Xian is the victim. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and left. Tendo hadn't gone any further when she suddenly stopped, and then she turned around to glance at the fishing rod woman. He does need your help now, but he doesn't necessarily need it. Once the study room is opened, he'll truly obtain your mister's inheritance. At that time, it won't be a problem of whether you acknowledge him, but whether he acknowledges all of you. Besides that, he was chosen by your mister, and he carries a heavy burden that your mister hasn't completed. He's your mister's last hope. As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her right hand lightly, and then the world returned to normal. Tendo glanced at the surroundings and said, "Of course, all of you've left Xiaota and regained your freedom. It's perfectly reasonable if all of you don't want to help him. It's up to all of you to decide what to do. He won't force all of you, and neither will I." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and vanished into the horizon. The fishing rod woman remained silent. Meanwhile, Lian Qian spoke abruptly, "Big sister, Yanjia and I are going to look for him." The fishing rod woman gazed at Lian Qian, and the latter spoke softly, "She's right. We aren't helping him, we're helping Mr. Moreover, I think that he is Mr. The fishing rod woman frowned slightly. "Why?" Lian Qian spoke in a low voice, "Because he was chosen by Mr. As soon as she finished speaking, she bowed slightly to the fishing rod woman. "Big sister, Tendo is right. Only he can complete Mister's last wish. I'm going to help him." Yanjia said, "Me too." As soon as they finished speaking, they glanced at each other, and then they turned around and left. Both of them had a rather good impression of Yi Xian, and coupled with the fact that he was a prophet, they didn't reject Yi Xian at all. Just as Tendo had said, it was because Yi Xian was chosen by Mr. The fishing rod woman remained silent at the side of the river. Tendo was walking slowly in the horizon. Right at this moment, the space in front of her suddenly split apart, and then a figure appeared before her. The figure gradually became material. It was Guan Yin. Behind Guan Yin, there was an old man. The moment the old man appeared, his divine sense directly locked onto Tendo. Tendo blinked. "So it's Stinky. Oh. So it's Miss Guan. What's the matter?" Guan Yin smiled. "Originally, my plan was to get rid of Yi Xian first, and then deal with you guys. However, I realized that I was wrong. I should get rid of you first." Tendo said in a low voice, "That's not right. You should go and fight Yi Xian. He has the study room, but I don't." Guan Yin looked at Tendo. "His special constitution was caused by you, right?" Tendo suddenly raised her right hand. "I swear to the heavens that it was definitely not caused by me. It has nothing to do with me." Guan Yin stared at Tendo. "Swear to the heavens? You are Tendo. Are you swearing to yourself?" Tendo sighed. "Miss Guan, you really should go and find that Yi Xian." Guan Yin smiled. "We will go and find him. However, before that, I want to kill you first." She finally understood. This Tendo was the worst. She had to get rid of this Tendo first. Otherwise, he would always play dirty tricks in the dark. Tendo smiled. "Don't be like this. I have no enmity with you guys." Guan Yin suddenly said, "Kill." Just as she finished speaking, the space around Tendo suddenly split open. A dozen powerful auras suddenly appeared in the field. All of them were at the origin returning realm. Seeing this scene, the heavenly Tao blinked. "You're for real?" Guan Yin smiled. "Of course." Finished speaking, she suddenly stabbed her sword towards Tendo. At this moment, Tendo turned and ran. With this run, she appeared hundreds of thousands of miles away. In the field, Guan Yin and the others were stunned. Running so fast? While they were stunned, Tendo had already disappeared from the fourth dimension. Back to the fifth dimension. Guan Yin and the others, running so fast. Guan Yin did not choose to chase after him, because she realized that this Tendo was very strong. Although he did not make a move, she knew that he was not weaker than her. So strong. At this moment, an elder walked beside Guan Yin and said, "Young master, the most important thing now is to kill Yi Xian and get that study to solve the danger of spirit realm." Guan Yin looked at the sky and said softly, "We can't kill him." Originally, she was very confident because the plain-dressed woman had left. This Yi Xian's greatest support had left. But after fighting with Yi Xian twice, she knew that the plain-dressed woman was not the only one behind him. The elder said that Yi Xian is not simple, especially that woman who appeared before. This person's strength, but young master, rest assured, our people will arrive soon. Guan Yin suddenly said, "Spirit realm has allied?" The elder nodded, "Basically." Guan Yin frowned, "Basically?" The elder said, "The ancient race has not moved. I don't know what they are thinking." Guan Yin was silent for a moment and then said, "Return." Finished speaking, she led everyone and disappeared. Not long after Guan Yin and the others disappeared, a young man suddenly appeared. Behind the young man was a black-robed elder. The young man looked into the distance and said, "Elder, have you investigated?" The black-robed elder nodded, "Yes." Finished speaking, he pointed a finger and a black light entered the young man's forehead. About 15 minutes later, elder said, "That plain-dressed woman has likely reached half-step soul release." The young man said softly, "In my view, she has likely reached the legendary soul release realm." Elder frowned, "How is that possible?" The young man smiled, "Why is it not possible? Just because we cannot do something does not mean others cannot do it." Elder said, "What plans does young master have?" The young man was silent for a moment and then said, "I do not think the spirit of 9 race will win." Elder's expression changed, "Young master, if you want to ally with Yi Xian, that is the same as becoming enemies with all of spirit realm. You cannot do this. Moreover, if everyone from spirit realm were to join forces, then Yi Xian would definitely not be a match for spirit realm. Even if that plain-dressed woman has reached soul release, she will still die." The young man was silent. At this time, the space in front of the young man suddenly split open and a woman walked out. It was Guan Yin. Guan Yin looked at the young man and smiled, "You must be the ancient race's young master, Ancient Ming." The young man smiled, "Greetings, Miss Guan." Guan Yin smiled, "Brother Ming, I know you are wary of that plain-dressed woman, but I know her true strength." Ancient Ming's eyebrows furrowed, "You know her true strength?" Guan Yin nodded, "I once fought with a little girl. That little girl said she was evenly matched with the plain-dressed woman. In my view, the plain-dressed woman's strength is at most half-step soul release realm. Of course, she is a swordsman, so her strength far surpasses an ordinary half-step soul release realm expert. Thus, as long as our spirit realm works together, what does a mere plain-dressed woman have to fear? Of course, Brother Ming can also bring the ancient race to ally with Yi Xian. But, if that happens, the ancient race's foundation in spirit realm." Saying this, she smiled but did not say anything. The primordial Ming said with a smile, "What are you talking about, Miss Guan? How could the primordial race ally with Yi Xian?" Saying this, he paused and then said, "Is that plain-dressed woman really at most half-step soul release realm?" Guan Yin looked at Ancient Ming, "If that little girl did not lie, then she is at most half-step soul release realm." Ancient Ming smiled, "How does Miss Guan know she will not lie?" Miss Guan shook her head, "That little girl's avatar is so powerful. How could such an expert lie? It is impossible." Ancient Ming nodded, he understood. The strong are proud. Chapter 1167. Primordial Ming said after a moment of silence, Miss Guan, to tell you the truth, my father had me come down this time to meet with Miss Guan and discuss how to take this study. In the end, he gave up on the unrealistic idea of working together with Yi Xian. The ancient race could not afford to gamble. If the ancient race and Yi Xian worked together, they would immediately become the enemy of all the forces of Spirit Realm. As Guan Yin said, the ancient race's foundation in Spirit Realm would be destroyed. And from the looks of it, the greatest threat to Yi Xian's side was the plain-dressed woman. If the plain-dressed woman was a self-release realm expert, the ancient race would dare to work together with Yi Xian. This was why the ancient race had not expressed their stance. Because the ancient race did not know the true strength of the plain-dressed woman. And as long as the plain-dressed woman was not a self-release realm expert, as the old man said, she would die. Spirit Realm had the ability to kill a half-step self-release realm expert. Because Spirit Realm itself had a half-step self-release realm expert. After learning the true strength of the plain-dressed woman, Primordial Ming did not hesitate. The ancient race was strong in Spirit Realm, but they did not dare to become enemies with all the forces of Spirit Realm. They did not have the ability. There was no need to do so. Because right now, it seemed that Yi Xian's side could not become enemies with all of Spirit Realm. At this time, Guan Yin suddenly smiled, Brother Ming, please. Primordial Ming nodded, please. Soon, the group disappeared. Sword Sect. After Yi Xian returned to Sword Sect, he went to find Senior Sister Lu. At this time, Senior Sister Lu's injuries had mostly healed because of the purple energy. Inside the hall, Senior Sister Lu looked at Yi Xian. I received news that many experts have appeared in the Nether Spirit World, many. Yi Xian said gravely, they should be from Spirit Realm. Senior Sister Lu nodded, what do you think? Yi Xian went silent for a moment before he said, our sword sect won't be able to stop them. Senior Sister Lu said, yes. Yi Xian looked at Senior Sister Lu, what do you think, Senior Sister Lu? You're the young sect leader now. The sword sect will listen to you. Senior Sister Lu said. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Senior Sister Lu, this is really too much. Senior Sister Lu looked at Yi Xian, don't joke around. From now on, you're the young sect leader of the sword sect. The future of the sword sect is in your hands. Yi Xian asked in a low voice, is Senior Sister Lu serious? Senior Sister Lu was expressionless. Do I look like I'm joking with you? Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before saying, our sword sect may not be able to defeat Spirit Realm, but what if we gather the power of the 5 dimensions? Senior Sister Lu shook her head. If all the cultivators of the 5th dimension came, they might be able to fight against Spirit Realm. However, you can't make them all come. Although if the sword sect perishes, they will also perish, before the sword sect perishes, they will absolutely not come to help. Yi Xian nodded. I know. If it's not related to me, I'll let it go. But what if it's related to me? Senior Sister Lu looked at Yi Xian. What do you mean? Yi Xian said in a low voice, benefits. Only benefits can move the people of the world. If they know that Spirit Realm. Senior Sister Lu suddenly interrupted Yi Xian. I understand what you mean. However, you have to know that Spirit Realm's target is you. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. To put it simply, if Spirit Realm came to find him, Yi Xian, it would be good if the people of the 5th dimension didn't gloat over his misfortune. Help? How could that be possible? Everyone was selfish. Senior Sister Lu suddenly said, of course, if we die, they will also die. However, before that, they won't come to live and die with you. So, we can only rely on ourselves to resist Spirit Realm. Yi Xian said softly, all the experts of the sword sect, retreat to the dimension of nothingness. Senior Sister Lu looked at Yi Xian. If we leave, many people will die. Yi Xian looked straight at Senior Sister Lu. If we don't leave, all the people of the sword sect will die here. Senior Sister Lu was silent. Yi Xian stood up and walked to the gate of the hall. He said in a low voice, "We were born in this universe. It is our responsibility to protect this universe. However, it is not only our responsibility. It is also the responsibility of the entire five-dimensional universe. We need to unite, but I know that other than my friends in the dimension of nothingness, no one is willing to come. Since this is the case, we will retreat to the dimension of nothingness and let the experts of Spirit Realm in. As long as people die, as long as Spirit Realm threatens their interests, the people of this universe will unite. They will come to the dimension of nothingness to fight with us." Senior Sister Lu looked at Yi Xian. "If we retreat, many people will die." Yi Xian turned around and walked to Senior Sister Lu. "If we don't leave, all of us will die. If we die, everyone in this universe will die. Everyone." Senior Sister Lu was silent. Yi Xian said gravely, "Only when the people of this universe see the terror of the spirit race will they unite, and this universe will be saved. Because right now, Spirit Realm is very united, the sixth dimension is very united, but our fifth dimension is scattered." After a moment of silence, Senior Sister Lu said, "What about Tendo?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I can't see through her, but I know that if she had to choose, she would choose all the living beings in the fifth dimension to perish together with Spirit Realm. What she wants to protect is not the people of this universe, but the universe itself. Therefore, we need all the experts of the fifth dimension to unite. Only then will we be able to resist Spirit Realm." Senior Sister Lu was silent. Yi Xian continued, "This battle is not only a matter of our sword sect, but also a matter of all the living beings in the fifth dimension. If we fight to the death, those people outside will take it as a matter of course, and some will even wish for us to die. Many people are like this, they will not be anxious until the blade falls on their head. The sword sect has guarded the spirit world for so many years, but now, the sword sect can no longer guard it. I can't call for help every time, can I?" Speaking of calling for help, he really had a headache. Call for help every time? Damn it, where would so many people come from? Unless he called for the sword sect master and the plain-dressed woman, it would be meaningless. This was a battle between two universes. He had already thought about it. If the sword sect master didn't come out, all the swordsmen in the sword sect would die here. Once all the sword sect died, this universe would really be finished. Because right now, only the sword sect could resist Spirit Realm, but the sword sect swordsmen were too few. If there were 1,000 swordsmen, the sword sect might be able to kill their way through Spirit Realm, but the sword sect only had a little more than 100 swordsmen. Not to mention the other forces of Spirit Realm, just the Dark Een spirit race was enough to exhaust the sword sect to death. At this time, Senior Sister Lu suddenly said, "Are you sure?" Yi Xian said solemnly, "Before we retreat, I have decided to call for all the experts of the fifth dimension to come to the sword world to help. If anyone comes, we will defend here to our death. As long as this place is here, the fifth dimension will also be here." Senior Sister Lu nodded, "Okay." Soon, the sword sect's call was spread throughout the fifth dimension by the Wu clan and the Worldwide Academy. On the first day, all the experts of the Wu clan and the celestial race came, followed by the Worldwide Academy in Fu Wenzong, as well as the experts of the Great Desolation Kingdom, Mutated Beast Scripture and Supreme God also came to the sword sect. However, other than these people, there was no one else. Not even a single rogue cultivator. Yi Xian stood in front of the sword sect's hall, just standing there. On the third day, no one came. On the fourth day, still no one came. On the fifth day, still no one came. On the morning of the 6th day, Yi Xian suddenly turned and looked at senior sister Lu in the distance. Everyone, retreat to the dimension of nothingness. Senior sister Lu nodded. Soon, all the experts in the sword world retreated. In the starry sky, Yi Xian rode on his sword, his face expressionless. To be honest, he, Yi Xian, was not a savior. If he could kill the spirit realm in a second, he wouldn't mind doing so to protect this universe. However, he didn't have this ability. Do what you have the ability to do. Now, he just wanted to protect the people around him. When Yi Xian and the others retreated to the dimension of nothingness, Guan Yin left with the experts of the Yin spirit world. In the sky, Guan Yin looked into the distance. He wants to summon everyone in the 5th dimension to fight against us. Beside Guan Yin, the primordial Ming nodded. If all the living beings in the 5th dimension fight against us, we won't be afraid, but it will be troublesome. Guan Yin nodded. The strength of the sword sect and Yi Xian couldn't be underestimated, especially Yi Xian, who would call people out from time to time. After a while, Guan Yin suddenly said, "Pass down my order, go straight to the dimension of nothingness, and don't hurt anyone on the way." A spirit of dark Yin was puzzled. Why? Guan Yin said indifferently, "If we kill people now, we will force all the experts in this universe to unite against us. But if we say that we are only targeting Yi Xian, the experts in this universe will just stand by and watch. After we get rid of the dimension of nothingness, even if all the experts in this universe join hands, they will still be a motley crew. Do you understand?" The spirit of dark Yin nodded slightly, understood. Guan Yin looked into the distance and said softly, "After reaching the dimension of nothingness, we can't attack. We can only surround it and wait for our people to arrive." After saying that, she looked at the primordial Ming. "What does Brother Ming think?" The primordial Ming nodded. "This is the safest way." Guan Yin smiled. "Let's go." After saying that, she directly led the spirit of dark Yin towards the dimension of nothingness. Along the way, the spirit of dark Yin did not kill anyone, which made many people in the 5th dimension who were originally worried feel relieved. Many people began to rejoice in others' misfortune. "Look, the target of the spirit realm is only Yi Xian, but Yi Xian wants to summon us to fight against the spirit realm. How vicious is his heart. People are selfish. It's normal for Yi Xian to want us to sell our lives for him. Unfortunately, he has miscalculated. Yi Xian is looking down on the world too much." In the distant starry sky, a woman carrying a fish suddenly stopped. Soon, she continued to walk into the distance. Not long after, a sigh came from the starry sky. "P.S. If you have to use one sentence to evaluate me, what would it be?" Chapter 1168. The Dimension of Nothingness. The Spirit of Dark World Army did not attack. Instead, they surrounded the dimension of nothingness. In a hall of the Wu clan, all the experts gathered. The atmosphere in the hall was somewhat heavy. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian smiled and said, "Does anyone have any thoughts?" Amu looked at Yi Xian and said, "The current situation is very disadvantageous to us." A Qian nodded and said, "Yes, the most serious thing is that we do not know the true strength of spirit realm. However, they know our strength like the back of their hand." Since they were not making a move now, it was obvious that they were waiting for someone. Once all the experts of spirit realm come, our situation will be even more difficult. Amu said in a deep voice, "There is an even more serious matter. Right now, the majority of the experts in the 5th dimension are rejoicing in our misfortune." Hearing this, everyone's expression darkened. Everyone present was very clear that the attack of spirit realm this time was definitely not just aimed at Yi Xian. If Yi Xian died, the entire 5th dimension would be annihilated. They could understand this, but not everyone understood this. If it did not concern them, they would let it go. This was human nature. As long as the blade did not fall on them, they would not care about the life and death of others. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, "We can only rely on ourselves." Saying this, he looked at senior sister Lu and said, "Aunt Lu, does the sword sect have a sword formation?" Senior sister Lu nodded and said, "Of course." Yi Xian nodded and said, "Set up the formation." Senior sister Lu stood up and left. At this moment, a woman suddenly appeared outside the hall. Seeing the person, everyone present was a little stunned. The person who came was Demon Yen, who had disappeared for a long time. Demon Yen looked at everyone present and said with a smile, "Everyone, do you mind joining our demon race?" Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at Demon Yen and said, "Miss Yen, why do you want to follow us? You should know that our current situation isn't very good." The demon I walked into the hall. She looked at Yi Xian and said, "The Dark Spirit tribe said that their target is you. They can only lie to those ignorant people. I know that if you die, everyone in the fifth dimension will die." Yi Xian was silent. Demon Yen said softly, "Although the demon clan is not as strong as the spirits of Dark One, we are not weak either." Yi Xian looked at Demon Yen. "Welcome." Demon Yen smiled and said, "Thank you." At that moment, an invisible pressure suddenly enveloped the entire void dimension. Everyone looked outside. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Outside the void dimension, Yi Xian appeared in front of Guan Yin and the others. In front of him, there were countless Spirit of Dark Yin experts. In terms of peak experts, the Sword Sect was not any weaker than the Spirit of Dark One. In fact, they could even crush the Spirit of Dark One. However, in terms of numbers, they were too inferior. Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Young Master Yi, we meet again." Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin and suddenly disappeared on the spot. Chi! A bloody light flashed across the battlefield. In the distance, Guan Yin was expressionless. She punched out. Boom! A blood-red light exploded. Guan Yin instantly retreated several hundred feet. Seeing this scene, the expressions of the Spirit of Dark One turned gloomy. The primordial Ming looked at the blood-red sword in Yi Xian's hand. When he saw this sword, his expression gradually became solemn. The sword was the reason why Yi Xian's attack was so powerful. Otherwise, Yi Xian wouldn't have been able to suppress Guan Yin, who was at the energy convergence realm. At this moment, numerous strong people dashed out from behind Yi Xian. The swordsman from the Sword Sect was leading the charge. Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin and smiled, "Miss Guan, are energy convergence realm breakers so weak?" Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and was about to speak. At this time, an elder beside her suddenly shouted, "How dare you? You are just." Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and was about to speak. Suddenly, Yi Xian vanished on the spot, and he was in front of the old man when he appeared again. The old man's expression changed drastically, and he was just about to attack when a powerful force suppressed him. Sword domain. The old man was shocked when he was suppressed. He didn't think much and punched at Yi Xian's abdomen. Yi Xian didn't dodge and allowed the old man's punch to land on his abdomen. Bang! Yi Xian retreated 100 zhang, but the old man's head was sent flying. Blood spurted out. All the Spirit of Dark Yin experts were shocked. In the distance, Yi Xian forcefully swallowed the blood in his throat. He looked at the Spirit of Dark Yin experts coldly and said with disdain, "Are energy convergence realm breakers so weak?" Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly pointed his sword at Guan Yin. "Don't talk nonsense. I don't want to waste my breath on you. Let me ask you, do you dare to fight one-on-one?" One-on-one. Guan Yin stared at Yi Xian. One-on-one? To be honest, she was no match for the current Yi Xian. because Yi Xian was too much of a nemesis to her. Guan Yin was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly laughed sinisterly. Since you don't dare to fight one-on-one, then let's gang up on you. All sword sect disciples, listen to my command. Kill them all, don't leave a single one alive. Saying that, he took the lead and rushed out. Chi! A blood-colored sword light cut through the sky and slashed at Guan Yin. The might of this sword strike caused everyone in the surroundings to be visibly moved. It had to be said that the sword in Yi Xian's hand wasn't something the executing heaven sword and soul-suppressing sword could compare to. This sword could fight one-on-one against an energy convergence realm breaker. And when it teamed up with Yi Xian, an energy convergence realm breaker was no match for them. Seeing Yi Xian rush out with the sword sect experts, Guan Yin's face instantly darkened. This Yi Xian was going to fight them to the death. Yi Xian was going to fight them to the death before the Spirit of Dark Tribe experts arrived. And now was the best time for them to make their move. Because Yi Xian had just killed an energy convergence realm breaker. To the sword sect, their morale was soaring. Over 100 swordsmen were equivalent to over 100 sharp swords. They directly broke through the Spirit of Dark Tribe's formation. And Yi Xian, who was leading them, was unstoppable. To be more accurate, the Spirit of Dark Tribe experts couldn't do anything to Yi Xian because he could swallow the deathly aura and Yin Qi. After Yi Xian rushed into the Spirit of Dark Tribe experts, he didn't defend at all. The deathly aura of the Spirit of Dark Tribe experts was like a natural tonic to him. Just like that, Yi Xian led over 100 swordsmen to kill all the way. It was simply irresistible. At this moment, dozens of energy convergence realm breakers blocked in front of Yi Xian and the others. Dozens of people attacked together. Everyone's eyes were only on one person, and that was Yi Xian. Obviously, they wanted to kill Yi Xian. Seeing this scene, Lu Yunxian and the others' faces changed. They quickly rushed towards Yi Xian. However, it was still a little too late. Dozens of powerful forces directly arrived in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian held his sword with both hands and slashed forward. Chi! A blood-colored sword light pierced through the air. Boom! That blood-red sword light directly exploded, and Yi Xian instantly retreated tens of thousands of feet away. Lu Yunxian and the others didn't attack again. They all retreated around Yi Xian and surrounded Yi Xian. At this time, the spirits of 9 dead powerhouses in the surroundings also came over and surrounded all of them. Guan Yin suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian and the others. Beside her, there were a total of 39 energy convergence realm breakers. Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Yi Xian, you wanted to kill us in one go. Unfortunately, you underestimated us. As she spoke, she looked at Primordial Ming. Brother Ming, please lead your experts into the void dimension. Don't leave a single one of them alive. The Primordial Ming looked at Yi Xian and nodded. In the next moment, he led the primordial race's returning realm powerhouses towards the dimension of nothingness. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Senior brother Lu, you kill your way back into the void dimension." Lu Yunxian looked at Yi Xian. "What about you?" Yi Xian smiled. "Listen to me." Lu Yunxian looked at Yi Xian. "Okay." As she spoke, she led the experts from Sword Sect and charged into the void dimension. The Spirit of Dark Tribe experts wanted to stop them but were stopped by Guan Yin. Very quickly, the experts from Sword Sect rushed out of the Spirit of Dark Tribe experts' encirclement and returned to the void dimension. Meanwhile, Yi Xian was surrounded alone. Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "You want to stop us by yourself?" Yi Xian grinned. "Why not?" Guan Yin shook her head. "Without the Spirit of Dark Tribe, you are nothing." Yi Xian smiled. He pointed his sword at Guan Yin. Without the spirit of dark tribe, what are you? How about this? I won't devour your sword, nor will I devour your spirit of death chi. You and I will seal our cultivation and fight to the death. Do you dare? Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian and didn't speak. Yi Xian smiled. Why? You don't dare? Guan Yin shook his head. We have the upper hand now. Why should I fight you? I won't fight you alone. We will gang up on you. What can you do? Yi Xian laughed. Bring it on. As soon as he finished speaking, the blood in his body suddenly boiled. Very quickly, a blazing flame appeared around him. Bloodline power. Seeing this scene, the faces of Guan Yin and the other spirit of dark tribe experts turned ferocious. The same bloodline aura. At this time, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. After a while, he suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes, there was a sea of blood. Bang! A ray of blood light suddenly shot into the sky. In an instant, the entire starry sky was transformed into a sea of blood. At the same time, a mysterious force suddenly enveloped the entire starry sky, forming a domain with blood. At this moment, the blood sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly trembled violently. At this moment, the aura of the sword actually rose sharply. Not only that, it was madly devouring the murderous intent and vicious aura around Yi Xian. Gradually, the murderous intent and aura it emitted were even stronger than Yi Xian's. One man and one sword. It was extremely strange. However, Yi Xian still retained a trace of consciousness. In the distance, Guan Yin stared at Yi Xian. At this moment, she felt danger from Yi Xian and the sword. Extremely dangerous. Yi Xian suddenly looked at Guan Yin. In the next moment, he vanished on the spot. Guan Yin's pupils suddenly shrank. She directly retreated and didn't take Yi Xian's sword. She wasn't confident that she could take it. However, as she retreated, the heads of dozens of spirits of 9 dead in front of her flew into the air. Blood gushed out like a fountain. At this moment, the blood sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly trembled violently. A ray of blood light suddenly enveloped him. Then, a voice suddenly sounded in his mind, "Don't wake up. Enter the state of madness. Don't stop until you die." Yi Xian was stunned. Whose voice is this? Soon, he figured it out. This is the voice of the sword spirit. Don't wake up. What nonsense is the sword spirit talking about? Does it have to go so far? At this moment, the sword spirit's voice sounded again, "They want to kill your sister." Ah! Yi Xian suddenly roared angrily. In the next moment, the last bit of his consciousness disappeared. At the moment when the last bit of his consciousness disappeared, the blood in his body started to burn. In an instant, the entire starry sky was set ablaze. In the distant starry sky, the Tendo of the 5th dimension suddenly turned her head and looked down. Gradually, her expression became solemn. After a moment, she softly said, "I almost forgot that your father is still alive. If your father becomes stronger, your bloodline will also become stronger. A growing bloodline. Damn, as long as your father doesn't die, your bloodline will have no upper limit. Damn it, aren't you cheating?" Chapter 1169. As if he'd thought of something, Tendo shook his head. Success is due to the bloodline, and failure is due to the bloodline. As long as Yi Xian's father remained alive, his bloodline would continue to grow stronger. However, there was a critical problem, and it was how would Yi Xian reverse his bloodline? The stronger his bloodline grew, the more difficult it would be to reverse it. However, based on Yi Xian's character, he would probably not consider such a problem. He was quite carefree at most times. When he thought up to here, Tendo shook his head and smiled, and then he walked towards the distance. At the instant that Yi Xian lost all reason, the aura of Yi Xian's bloodline suddenly rose explosively. At this moment, the sword in his hand suddenly trembled violently, and it transformed into a ray of light that shot forward. Hiss! In the distance, a Returnant's World Breaker realm expert wasn't even able to react before he was instantly annihilated by the sword. Everyone in the surroundings was shocked when they witnessed this scene. Guan Yin's expression changed drastically as well. What's going on? Is Yi Xian actually so strong after losing all reason? The problem is, how did that sword become so strong as well? Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly opened his right hand, and the blood-red sword flew into his grasp. He brought it up to his nose and sniffed it lightly, and it didn't take long for an intoxicated expression to appear on his face. The smell of blood. Guan Yin stared fixedly at Yi Xian, and then she suddenly waved her right hand, kill. Attack together. As soon as she finished speaking, the spirit of Yin experts around her charged at Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Yi Xian raised his head and glanced at the surroundings. In an instant, an area of over 10,000 kilometers had been transformed into an ocean of blood, and the minds of some spirit of Yin experts within the ocean of blood had been corroded by a strand of killing intent and evil energy. As soon as their minds were corroded, those spirit of Yin experts immediately attacked the people around them. It didn't take long for the spirit of Yin experts to fall into chaos. Guan Yin's expression changed drastically when she witnessed this scene, and she gazed at Yi Xian and spoke furiously, kill. Kill him first. The Dark Yin race's origin returning realm breaker realm experts that were not corroded directly rushed towards Yi Xian. There were more than 30 of them. Yi Xian was just about to attack when the blood-red sword in his hand transformed into a ray of blood-red light that shot into the center of his forehead. Yi Xian's figure trembled violently. In the next moment, Yi Xian's right foot moved lightly to the right while he pressed his palms together, and then a sword silently condensed in his palms. It was that blood sword. When the return to origin breaking world elites were 100 feet away from him, he slashed forward with his sword. A blood light came out. Boom! The 30 origin-breaking realm elites were forced to stop by the blood light, but in the next moment, the dozens of people became dozens of black lights and rushed at Yi Xian again. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly rushed over as well. Very quickly, a spirit of Yin expert punched towards Yi Xian's head, and the powerful force caused the space behind Yi Xian to explode. Yi Xian didn't dodge, and he allowed the punch to land on his head. However, at the same time, his sword pierced through the opponent's forehead. Chi! Bang! Yi Xian was instantly sent flying. As he flew, his body trembled violently, and his head was effectively deformed. However, when he stopped, his head had returned to normal. Guan Yin's expression instantly became extremely unsightly when he witnessed this scene. What kind of physical body was this? At this moment, Yi Xian rushed out again. In the instant he rushed out, another return to origin breaking world elite was killed by him. He couldn't stop Yi Xian at all. Because Yi Xian was exchanging a life for a life. If someone punched him, even if it was a punch aimed at his head, he would be able to block it. However, if he gave someone a sword, they couldn't block it at all. The sword in Yi Xian's hand was simply too abnormal. It could be said that even without Yi Xian, this sword could still defeat a return to origin breaking world elite. What kind of demonic sword was this? Very quickly, there were already several return to origin breaking world elites that had fallen. Towards Yi Xian, the spirit of Yin experts were also having a headache. This was because their deathly aura was useless against Yi Xian. Therefore, when they fought against Yi Xian, they couldn't use deathly aura, and could only use pure physical strength. Under such circumstances, their strength was discounted. It could be said that when they fought against Yi Xian, they could only use less than 60% of their strength. They had no choice, because any of their deathly aura and Yin aura would be absorbed by Yi Xian. Yi Xian's physical body was simply the nemesis of the spirit of Yin clan. In the distance, Guan Yin suddenly looked towards the dimension of nothingness. At this moment, the primordial Ming had already retreated. This was because his people were simply not a match for the sword sect. Guan Yin turned around and looked towards the horizon. After a moment, she frowned because she didn't feel any experts from the spirit realm. In other words, the experts from the spirit realm hadn't reached the fifth dimension yet. At this moment, another return to origin breaking world elite from the spirit of Yin clan was pierced through the forehead by Yi Xian's sword. The moment the sword pierced through, the elite's soul was instantly destroyed. His soul couldn't even escape, because the sword had instantly destroyed all his vitality. If it was a normal sword, it definitely wouldn't be able to do this. However, the problem was that the sword in Yi Xian's hand wasn't a normal sword. This was a sword that had its own thoughts. Moreover, the battle experience of this sword could be said to be far beyond that of anyone present. Although Yi Xian had killed that return to origin breaking world elite, he himself was also sent flying. Not only that, there was a deep knife wound on his chest. Those elites were also smart. You might be immune to death aura and sword, but you couldn't be immune to knives, right? Therefore, they directly took out other weapons. However, they underestimated Yi Xian's self-recovery ability. The moment Yi Xian stopped, his body had already more or less recovered. Heart of life. As Tendo had said, as long as he wasn't instantly killed, he, Yi Xian, wouldn't die. As for the other spirit of Yin clan elites, they didn't dare to approach Yi Xian at all. This was because once they got close to Yi Xian, their minds would be eroded by Yi Xian's killing intent. Therefore, they all hid far away. When they saw one person fight against dozens of return to origin breaking world elites, all the spirit of Yin clan's faces turned ugly. What kind of monster was this Yi Xian? At this moment, Guan Yin's face was also extremely ugly. She suddenly realized that she had underestimated Yi Xian. In the beginning, she was only afraid of the people behind Yi Xian and ignored Yi Xian himself. If this continued, it would be very disadvantageous for their side. At this moment, a spirit of Yin clan elder suddenly stood beside Guan Yin. The elder said in a deep voice, "His self-recovery speed is too fast. If this continues, we will be exhausted to death by him." Guan Yin looked at Yi Xian in the distance. After a moment, her expression turned ferocious. "Go catch his sister." In her intelligence, Yi Xian's sister was Yi Xian's weakness. Originally, she didn't want to use such despicable methods. But at this moment, she had no other choice. If she didn't catch Yi Ling, Yi Xian would be sent to heaven. Hearing Guan Yin's words, the elder shook his head, "No." Saying so, he looked at the dimension of nothingness, sword sect. Guan Yin looked at the entrance of the dimension of nothingness. There, more than 100 swordsmen were waiting in formation. If they wanted to enter the dimension of nothingness, they would have to go past them. Guan Yin turned to look at the primordial Ming, who was not far away. The latter was silent. Guan Yin stared at the primordial Ming. "Brother Ming, my people will block the sword sect. Your people will go and catch Yi Ling. Is that feasible?" The primordial Ming hesitated for a moment and said, "Miss Guan, we should retreat." Guan Yin smiled, "Retreat? If we retreat now, more people will die." The primordial Ming was silent. Guan Yin looked at the dimension of nothingness. "Our current combat power is still far beyond them. We can fight." The primordial Ming was silent. Obviously, he was still hesitant. Guan Yin was about to speak, but at this moment, more than a dozen powerful auras suddenly came from the horizon. Guan Yin quickly turned her head. At this time, a middle-aged man wearing golden armor appeared in front of Guan Yin. The middle-aged man glanced at Guan Yin. "You are the Dark Yin tribe's young patriarch?" Guan Yin was about to speak when an elder's voice suddenly entered her mind. "He is from the Hellion tribe. His name is Hellion Lin, one of the 3 heroes of the Hellion family." Guan Yin looked at Hellion Lin. "So it is Senior Hellion." Hellion Lin turned to look at Yi Xian in the distance. When he saw Yi Xian's state, he frowned. "This is Yi Xian?" Guan Yin nodded. Hellion Lin sized up Yi Xian. "This person's bloodline is so strong." Guan Yin nodded. "This person's bloodline is far beyond my imagination. Especially his physical body, it is extremely strong." Hellion Lin said, "The study room is in his possession?" Guan Yin glanced at Hellion Lin, and then she said, "Yes." Hellion Lin suddenly vanished on the spot. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and slashed down with his sword. Bang! An expanse of blood erupted. Yi Xian was instantly pushed over 1 kilometer back, and Hellion Lin was pushed over 300 m back as well. After he stopped, Hellion Lin looked at his right hand. A wound had split open on his right hand, and fresh blood was flowing out. Hellion Lin raised his head to look at Yi Xian in the distance when he saw this scene. He was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward. With each step, he created a domain. Sword domain and blood domain. These 2 domains directly enveloped Hellion Lin. In the next moment, Yi Xian wielded his sword with both hands and slashed down. A ray of blood-red light flashed between the sword domain and the blood prison. Hellion Lin didn't dare act carelessly. He opened his right hand, and a black shield appeared in his grasp. He held the black shield in his hand and pushed it forward. Bang! The ray of blood-red light arrived, and the black shield instantly split apart while Hellion Lin was pushed over 300 m back. As soon as he stopped, the shield in Hellion Lin's hand exploded apart. Hellion Lin's expression became solemn, and he gazed at the sword in Yi Xian's hand. What a formidable sword! Meanwhile, Guan Yin suddenly said, "Senior Hellion, he really cares about his younger sister. If we can capture her, then he'll definitely surrender without a fight." Hellion Lin gazed at Guan Yin. "Where is his younger sister?" Guan Yin pointed at the entrance to the void dimension. "She's in there. However, the experts of the sword sect are standing guard there. The experts of the primal race and I can keep the sword sect and Yi Xian busy." Hellion Lin fell silent for a moment before he said, "All right, I'll go capture his younger sister." As soon as he finished speaking, he led the experts of the Hellion family towards the void dimension. Guan Yin suddenly said, "Stop the experts of the sword sect." As soon as her voice fell, countless spirit of 9 Yin and primal race experts charged towards the sword sect. After the sword sect was restrained, Hellion Lin and the others arrived at the graveyard without a hitch. Hellion Lin walked towards the graveyard. Not far away, the old tomb guard just watched. He didn't stop Hellion Lin. In the distant starry sky, Tendo looked down and shook his head. Capture his younger sister? Sigh. His younger sister is the best fighter in the entire 5th dimension. Why aren't his younger sisters normal people? People with younger sisters cannot be provoked. Cannot be provoked. P.S. Yesterday, I asked you to evaluate me with 1 sentence. Damn, none of you said anything good. After accompanying me for so many years, am I a shameless person in your eyes? You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.